Research-to-Practice Transit Symposium. This is our second day, October 29th, 2025. We are on the second day of a three-day event, and we're very pleased to have an exciting symposium for you today. So the schedule for today is we will have, oops, sorry, my apologies, wrong presentation. We will share the correct one for today, for Wednesday. Let me go ahead and share again. So, yes, here is the correct one. My apologies. So we will have a presentation on high-speed rail, followed by a 15-minute break, then a presentation on rural transit, followed by another break, another session on intercity bus networks, and ending on a session about microtransit and paratransit. We are really excited for these sessions we have today. So we would like to thank the sponsors of this event, California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, UC Davis Transit Research Center, the American Public Transportation Association, University of Florida Transportation Institute, the Mineta Transportation Institute, and the Smarter Center. Thanks, everybody, to the steering committee. We worked hard for months to put this together and organize the event. So really excited to put this on for you today. A special thanks to Caltrans employees Fahima Sheikh, Alicia Keith, Jane Fortes, and Caitlin Chikansky for all of the works on graphics and spreading the word and just making this a successful event. And of course, thanks to all the participants today. We're really grateful that they agreed to speak, and we're looking forward to them. For those of you in the American Institute of Certified Planners, there is certification maintenance credit available. You can find this link on the website for the symposium. If you click on the link, it will take you to the certification maintenance page where you can click and get credit for attending today. If there are any questions for the panelists or if there are any technical issues, please feel free to email the organizers at pm2research@dot.ca.gov. Thank you very much, and we are excited, to welcome to this event for the first session about high-speed rail, Dr. Zhenhua Chen, Dr. Greg Erhardt, and Dr. Greg Macfarlane. So, for this event, first off, we will have Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen is an associate professor in city and regional planning at the Knowlton School of Architecture at The Ohio State University. His research interest includes infrastructure planning and policy, regional science, risk and resilience, and big data analytics. He has a strong background in economic impact assessments of infrastructure investment, disasters, and resilience using computable general equilibrium models. Zhenhua has published 5 books, including Chinese railways in the area of high speed. He is a guest editor of Transportation Research Part A, Policy and Practice, and Transportation Research Part D, Transport and Environment. He is also a research fellow at the National Center of Risk and Economic Analysis of Tourism Events, or CREATE, at the University of Southern California and the Risk Institute at The Ohio State University. He received his PhD in public policy from George Mason University, an MA in regional economics from Shenzhen University in China, and a BA in management from the University of Electronic and Science and Technology of China. Then we'll have a presentation by Dr. Greg Erhardt. Dr. Erhardt is a Raymond Blythe Associate Professor of Civil Engineering at the University of Kentucky, a Hans Fischer Fellow at the Institute for Advanced Study, the Technical University of Munich, and a Senior Advisor to Bay Area Metro. He brings more than 20 years of experience in both research and practice, developing and applying metropolitan and statewide travel demand models, including 8 years in California. Finally, we will have a presentation by Dr. Gregory S. Macfarlane, who is an accomplished transportation researcher and educator specializing in travel demand modeling, data-driven transportation planning, and urban mobility analysis. He is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Civil and Construction Engineering at Brigham Young University. His research integrates advanced statistical and econometric models to enhance transportation system efficiency with a focus on multimodal networks, accessibility, and emerging mobility technologies. He is an alumnus of BYU and Georgia Tech. So thank you all for being willing to speak today. And so we'll start off with Dr. Chen.
Okay, well, thank you, Chart, and also thank you for the organizing committees to inviting me to this great event. Today, I'm be very happy to share with you some of my research on these topics. So first, let me share with you my screen. So just give me a second. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, good morning, everyone, and this is Zhenhua Chen. Today, I'd like to share with you a topic which is called Reimagining High-Speed Rail, Lessons Beyond the Cost Benefit from the Global Experiences. I understand we have quite a lot of audiences from California, and so today's talks, hopefully, we'll be able to share some of the insights from my research and also looking into other countries. So hopefully we can see how to develop high-speed rail for the future. First, just to give you a few backgrounds. As we all know that high-speed rail has becoming so important nowadays, has received a rapid development in many countries, including China, Japan, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. We also know that many countries are also in the process of either planning or developing such a high-speed rail system, including here at United States. But on the other hand, we also know that investment in high-speed rail requires a massive of investment. So definitely planning and needs to be done cautiously so that funding can be used effectively and efficiently. Now, this just to give you some ideas about the global trend of high-speed rail development. So as you can see from this diagram, started in 1964 when Japan launched their first high-speed rail. The high-speed development globally has experienced gradually improvement, but really not until 2004. That is because when China started to build in the massive high-speed rail networks. So we can see that obviously high-speed rail is not new in the US. If we look into the history, we can see that the earliest initiatives for high-speed development can date back to the 1960s. Although different efforts has been made over the years, we know that the US is still struggling of building high-speed rail primarily due to the political, financial, and institutional challenges. Now, obviously, given this background, why high-speed rail matters, right? So, and how should we consider high-speed investment in the United States? So here, I like to really talk in terms of the understanding of high-speed rail, particularly given its opportunities, some of the risk and challenges, and so hopefully this can stimulate some discussion and thinking about the future. Now, I wanted to use China as examples here and to really help us understanding about some of the lessons learned for other countries. As we all know that China has so far developed the world's largest high-speed networks. The most recent number indicates there is already 48,000 kilometers of high-speed rail being in operations. And in addition, there is a plans to further expand the networks to 60,000 kilometers by the year of 2030s. And so if you look into the annual investment, this is equivalent to roughly speaking, 110 billion US dollars of investment in the rail sectors every year. And this has been already continued for 2 decades. So far, as you can see from the maps, high-speed rail has already connected 31 provinces, 31 provinces, and many cities has daily high-speed rail services. Some of the corridors has daily high-speed rail frequencies range from 70 to 100 trains per day. Also, another important thing to note is the fact that because of the centralized government political system, the investment in China is not solely focused on economic standpoint of view. There is a lot of considerations from social equities and stabilities perspective. So as I highlighted here, this was primarily driven by a national visions. It includes a consistent long-term planning and institutional coordination. This is which is quite different from the Western countries where most of the infrastructure projects are primarily focused on the return to investment of calculation. Now, many people may be curious about, well, what is the differences between the planning philosophy between China and the US? Here, this slides, I try to summarize a few key aspects in terms of decision drivers, government structures, finance mechanisms, implementation approach, and evaluation criteria. So as you can see clearly, these two giant powers has a differences in terms of their decision-making process. Whereas I mentioned earlier, in the US, we have seen it is more a market-based approach focused primarily on return to investment and with the fragmented political mandates. Whereas in China, most of these infrastructure or nearly all of the infrastructure are actually strategically goal-oriented with the long-term national visions. Such a mechanism is also related to other aspects such as financing mechanisms. As we know, one of the biggest challenges of developing high-speed rail in the United States is due to the fundings, whereas in China, most of the funds were provided, from the government and or the national banking system. Also, we can see the evaluation criteria is different. We have heard a lot of the focuses is on the return to investment, how we could make these projects profitable, either in the short term, medium terms. Whereas in the case of China, a lot of these mega infrastructure investment are primarily focused on more a wider, what we call the socioeconomic benefits, such as economic growth and equities and so on. Over the years, our research team has been primarily focused on understanding evaluations of the social economic impacts of high-speed rail. So we have published a series of studies, really looking again from the global perspective, how different countries, measures their infrastructures. In this case, high-speed rail. These are just some of the major publications here. But I just wanted to share with you one of the key highlights, what we find out. While from the projects level, a lot of the focus is still on, projects return to investment. There has been a general consensus that high-speed rail's contribution or benefits includes not only adding additional modes of travel, but benefits widely on the societies on various aspects. So this diagram here illustrated about those studies with the country of focuses as well as topics of focuses. So as you can see, those evaluations covers development strategies, environment impacts, economic impacts, knowledge productivities, modal comparisons, and tourisms, and so on. Now, another important thing to look is the fact that high-speed investment, again, like also many urban transit system, it has a huge impact on land change and land development. So trying to linking high-speed rail to land values and land impacts is definitely an important angle to look into. Now here, this slides, what I'm sharing with you are based on some of the earlier study. where we find out, in fact, with the development of high-speed rail, many cities actually has developed, the so-called high-speed rail new town, which is a residential complex with a lot of new housings is being added. In addition, we have also seen that there are a lot of new stations being developed, either in the rural or suburban areas. Local governments are using high-speed rail as mechanisms to promote regional economic growth. The picture here I'm sharing with you is this latest opening Chongqing East Railway Station, which is considered as the world's largest railway station. So from the structure, you can see it tried to integrate it not only high-speed rail, but with many other commercial transit and system. So definitely that is an areas we should pay more attention to, especially in the US. The third aspect is here I wanted to emphasize on is about equities in terms of access. From the literatures, we have seen that while many scholars argue that high-speed rail works the best for the distance, usually between the 500 to 800 kilometers of range. However, in the case of China, high-speed rail has also been used as a policy tool to promote regional coordinated development, which means that linking the less developed regions with the developed regions to promote coordinated development. So this is the kind of, again, studies that we also conducted earlier, but focuses on the modal kind of equity issues. So what you can see here is as there are more people using high-speed rail, clearly there are still people using conventional rail. So one of the big lessons learned here in this case is, well, maybe we should consider more in terms of what will be the systems going to serving for. Are we serving for the premium travel markets or business people, or are we planning to serve a general publics? So in other words, how should we avoid exclusions through pricing and service design? That definitely needs more research here. The last one here, the viewpoints here I want to share with everyone is about the question about right sizing of infrastructure. In other words, what would be the right size of high-speed rail for different countries? This is an important topic because we recently have studied extensively, both for the case of China as well as for the UK. We find out infrastructure from historically typically correlated with the populations, the size of population. As you can see from the pictures, the first one on the top shows to you the railway lines and stations in England and Wales over almost 200 years. We have seen that railway have experienced a railway mania, rapid expansion, and all of a suddenly decline. So similar patterns can be found in the United States as well. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, China is in the process still in a massive expansion, but definitely concerns exist in terms of how much high-speed rail is actually needed. So the implications for the US definitely is we needed to consider this perspective, particularly avoid both over and under building of those infrastructures. So just to quickly summarize, as I said earlier, while China and the US has a totally different social demographic, political context, there are still important lessons learned that can be shed lights to other countries. Number one, we think that long-term, these social economic impacts should definitely be educated, should be definitely emphasized when we're thinking about these mega infrastructure. In other words, we shouldn't only consider high-speed rail as a short-term alternatives to solving issues like congestion or so on, but it definitely has far-reaching impacts on every aspect of the society. Secondly, we can also see that in the case of China, one of the important lessons is in terms of how countries should launch some strategic planning with some sustainable commitment. Well, some of this is not possible given this fragmented political system in the US. Some continuous efforts are definitely needed, particularly from scientific and collaborative perspective. In other words, we needed to definitely improve the understanding how high-speed rail could be developed as suitable for this country. Just final slides to summarize. Some of the major takeaway, I think, for the U.S. In terms of high-speed development is uh, there probably should be more consideration of framing high-speed rail, how this could be considered as a national strategies, not simply just as a way of adding a mobility option, but trying to consider high-speed rail as an option for economic integrations, resilience, and equities, tools. We also needed to more consideration of the land use integrated with the railway planning so that those benefits could be further understood. Some of the other perspective also including how should we better assess these infrastructures impacts. Again, we see there is a great potentials to be expanded. So due to limited time, so I will not read all of this. So if you are interested in learning more about our research, you can feel free to check those references, which is in my Google Scholar. There are also two books about Chinese high-speed rail. So if you're interested to learn more about the China's examples, feel free to look into these books. With that, I will conclude here. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Chen. A very fascinating presentation. We'll now hear from Dr. Greg Erhardt from the University of Kentucky.
Excellent. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. Let me share here. Okay, can everyone see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So this study is to look at the California high-speed rail ridership forecasts in an international context. I want to start by acknowledging some of my collaborators and co-authors on this work, including Greg Macfarlane, who you'll hear from after me. So first, a little background on California high-speed rail. And this is the phase one of the project that we're looking at, which would connect San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim. According to the high-speed rail business plan in 2024, you see it would connect San Francisco to LA in 2 hours, 40 minutes. The cost of this project is somewhere between $89 and $128 billion. Of that, they have about $30 billion secured. And this project was initiated in 2008 as part of a voter referendum, which authorized issuing $9.95 billion of bonds to build high-speed rail connecting Los Angeles and San Francisco. And I believe 90% of that money was required to be spent on construction. So as of right now, they're actually building a segment of this within the Central Valley, the section from Madera down close to Bakersfield. And the connections into San Francisco and Los Angeles are not yet fully funded. The projections for this include 28 million annual riders by 2040, with an annual fare box revenue generated by those riders of about $3.5 billion, little over $100 per ticket for that. And so our question, or what we're looking at in this study, is simply an assessment of, are these ridership forecasts reasonable? I'll set aside the cost for the most part in this presentation, focusing on how many passengers we're serving. So within risk in forecasting, and particularly among mega projects, very often things are harder than we think. And there's two broad approaches to how we would go about forecasting ridership costs and a number of other things, as articulated by Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate, going back to his work in the 1970s. And this is further sort of the risks are identified in Bent Flyberg's work on mega projects and risk. There's an insider's view, and the insider's view considers bottom-up estimates based on detailed knowledge of a project. It would be forward-looking, and in this instance, it's implemented in the form of something called the California Rail Ridership Model, which was developed specifically to forecast ridership for California high-speed rail and other rail corridors in California. So detailed analysis, basically a four-step travel demand model, considering detailed travel patterns across 5,000 traffic analysis zones in California. Kahneman and Flyberg advocate for complementing this with what they call the outsider's view. And this is a high-level comparison to other similar projects, looking backwards at what's actually been achieved in terms of both ridership and costs. And this is formalized as something known as reference class forecasting. So the idea is a check on our forecasts developed from the bottom up. We would also look at other projects that have already opened and do an assessment of, are we in line with what's actually been achieved in reality, or are we out of line in that? And that's exactly what we're looking at in this study based on available information and available data. So our specific approach here is in 4 parts, 2 of which I'm going to focus on in my presentation today. First is some comparisons to published ridership data on global high-speed rail lines. And we're going to see, are we within the sort of reasonable ranges of what those have actually achieved. In addition, we did interviews with high-speed rail professionals in 11 countries to gather some lessons learned from that. We're doing a more detailed, what we call comparative market analysis with a new high-speed rail line in Germany connecting Munich and Berlin. And then we implemented some alternative models in California to get a sort of second view, and that's some of the work that Greg Macfarlane will talk about here in a minute. You kind of see the scale of California versus Germany here. Population-wise, California has about 40 million residents, Germany about 80 million. Los Angeles and San Francisco specifically are, and the Bay Area more broadly, are bigger metropolitan areas than you have in Berlin and Munich. So first, a few international comparisons, and Los Angeles to San Francisco is 543 kilometers apart in straight line distance. And as you heard Dr. Chen mention earlier, this is actually a pretty ideal distance for high-speed rail. This number comes up a lot in the literature as kind of an ideal distance. And in the bottom left corner, what you see there is a sort of graphic from the Japanese railways. And the way they think about this is for very short trips, the car is going to dominate because access and egress time to the stations will be a large portion of the travel time. But for distances above about 800 kilometers, air is going to dominate simply because an airplane may go 500 miles per hour. In best case, the rail may go 200 miles per hour. And so you've got sort of this distance range in which rail is going to be most competitive, and San Francisco to LA sits right in the middle of that. So it's promising. In addition, they're very large markets. On the right-hand side, what you see is a tabulation that was looking at how we can shift air onto rail in Europe. And they did an assessment of the largest city pairs that were not efficiently connected by rail within Europe and within 500 kilometers. And what you see is that the Los Angeles to San Francisco connection is much, much larger than any of those in Europe that are disconnected from rail. The Munich to Berlin is also very high up there, but in terms of the size of the markets, the size of the metro area, Los Angeles to San Francisco is much larger. And so you see what you have is a promising high-level market in this connection. Next, we can look at actual ridership published on lines, and this is from 2013, so does not include some of the more recent Chinese lines in particular, but it's a publication where they're looking at millions of passengers per year from new high-speed rail lines in Europe and Asia. And what you see is among these 34 lines, 13 of them generated post-opening ridership between 20 and 30 million annually. The projection of 28 million annual riders in 2040 for California high-speed rail appears reasonable within this range. Next, a common way this is considered is looking specifically at air and rail market shares. And so the y-axis here is the share of aviation among air and rail. So 100% would be all air and 0% would be all rail. And each dot is a city pair from an international line. You want to be, and what they've sort of plotted here is the orange line is kind of the best you could reasonably achieve with rail in terms of the rail market share based on the distance. And what you see is the Munich-Berlin line that we're considering as a comparison actually outperforms some of the best lines out there. Whereas the San Francisco to LA based on the California rail ridership model projections is actually within the range of what's observed globally. So far that seems pretty reasonable. We can also look at this instead of as a function of distance, as a function of the excess travel time of train over air. So that's what the x-axis is here in this case. It's how many additional hours you need to travel by train versus traveling by air. Now, the wrinkle or the uncertainty in all of this is that it's going to depend quite a lot on the access and the egress time. And so it depends where the airports are and where the stations are, whereas most of these are plotting city center to city center. So that makes a substantial difference here. But you can see that they follow a pretty clear curve depending on the travel time excess over air. They tend to converge, and this is the rail market share. You want to be high on this graph. They tend to converge along the observed curve here. And what you see is that, again, the Munich to Berlin line outperforms comparable peers, whereas the San Francisco to LA line, based on the current projections, underperforms relative to these other reasonable peers. So just kind of looking at a high level, there is room for San Francisco to LA to be better on this simple comparison. Next, looking in a little more detail at Munich to Berlin, this is a line that opened in 2017, and it was an important connection between East and West Germany about 18 years after reunification. So there were less connections across the East and West. And in particular, they upgraded a section of track that you see there in purple, which led to a reduction in travel time of about 2 hours, going from about 6 hours of travel time between Munich and Berlin on train to about 4 hours. Over that period from 2017 through 2024, rail passengers in this corridor between Berlin and Munich increased by about 350%. These numbers are from Deutsche Bahn. Deutsche Bahn is quite happy with the results of this project that you see. Munich and Berlin are two large cities. The distances are similar to California, and it's another developed nation where incomes are more comparable to what you see in California, although still lower and certainly higher than what you might see in China in many places. We can also consider that there are some differences, and in particular, geography makes high-speed rail more challenging in California than Germany, or sort of French comparisons. So first of all, we need to acknowledge that California cities are less dense than the German cities, and they have higher car ownership, and there's less connection, both via local rail and via regional rail to other outlying areas. So all of those things may be hits against California in terms of ridership. Second, we observe two things more related to the cost side, but were interesting observations from some of the literature. Germany actually benefits from a very strong network of conventional rail, and what this does is allows high-speed rail to use existing tracks into city centers. California high-speed rail can do this to some degree. They paid to electrify the Caltrain tracks leading into San Francisco, but there's more challenges on the Los Angeles portion of that. Conversely, the French in building high-speed rails also benefited from favorable geography. So most of the French urban areas are within 800 kilometers of Paris, so it's about the right distance. And in between, there's actually quite low population densities and flat terrain. So this makes it relatively cost effective to build track there. And for many of the smaller towns that are connected, they actually built new stations on the outskirts of the town, whereas in Germany, they used existing track to go into the city centers. The outskirt stations allow for faster connections between the larger urban areas, but obviously worse connections to the smaller urban areas that you see there. When we look at travel times, California High-Speed Rail, looking at not just the express line, but in particular the lines with stops, would make the trip in about 4 hours for the largest number of trains, which is actually comparable to the Munich-Berlin line. And it's quite competitive with air, depending on the access time of each of them. So San Francisco to LA, we see road distance 600 miles. The driving time is about 7 hours. Flight time 1.4 hours we have. But once you account for time to access the airport, 2.7 hours, depending on how you count that access time. The rail station to station time is 4 hours. So it's quite a bit faster than driving, and somewhere 1.3 to 2.6 hours slower than flying. Again, quite reasonable. You see in some of the literature also sort of 3 hours cited as a threshold for where high-speed rail makes sense. And that comes from the idea that if I can complete the trip, a one-way trip in 3 hours, I can complete a round trip in 1 day and not have to stay overnight. Next, kind of digging in a little more detail into the California forecasts, we see that the travel market is stable. What you see on the right is the total number of trips in the core markets. And I've divided this up kind of by market region, the San Francisco, Oakland, MSA, San Jose metro area, the Central Valley, and the LA metro area. And the highlighted cells are really kind of the core markets that you're trying to serve with high-speed rail. So in 2018, those markets have about 130,000 trips daily. And in 2040, it's about 136,000. It's not much difference, in large part because California's population has basically stopped growing. Back about a decade ago, California had projections to go from 40 to over 50 million people. Current projections from the California Department of Finance are basically for flat population growth. A large part of that is due to the high housing costs in California. The upside of this, though, is that it means that there's somewhat less risk in the forecast because you're not banking or you're not counting on growth that hasn't yet happened. We can also look at the amount of the travel that is induced or new trips between the metro areas that otherwise would not have occurred, as opposed to diverting from other modes. And what you see here in the top table is the change in trips on the phase one from the business as usual, and sort of LA to San Francisco and to San Jose, 24 to 29% induced travel, very little outside of that in induced travel. The bottom are a few benchmark studies, and you see induced travel as a percentage of ridership somewhere between 11 and 50%. So we're basically in line with some of the benchmark studies. However, I do need to note that as we talk to some interview respondents, they generally recommend forecasting no more than 5 to 10% induced travel, basically as a risk management strategy, and that we count on building travel modes that primarily divert from other modes. Then when we look specifically at comparisons in Munich to Berlin versus on the top versus California on the bottom. So if you focus first on the bottom and the yellow cells, the 2040 business as usual is the no build, high-speed rail is the build. You see LA to San Francisco and San Jose, you're achieving over 20% transit or rail mode share in those cases, with pretty small rail mode shares in the other core markets to the Central Valley in particular. And a lot of that is there's simply nowhere to go in the Central Valley unless you have a car on that end, whereas there is within San Jose, San Francisco, and LA areas. In comparison, though, when we look at the rail share between Munich, Berlin before and after their rail improvements, you see that the rail mode share went from 17% in 2017 up to 50% in 2024. So you see very substantial increases in that rail mode share. And much of that is coming from air. So on the top, again, you see before this expansion, Munich to Berlin rail captured 28% of the rail and air market. After the improvements, it went up to 82%. When we look at California, that sort of LA to San Jose segment, between 4 and 5% rail in the business as usual, and up around 30% with the expansion. So still a much smaller market share relative to air than we have in Germany. A couple of notes here. One is that domestic air travel in Germany overall, not just in this corridor, but in the nation as a whole, has fallen 50% between 2019 and 2025. I've not seen a good explanation for why exactly that is, but there is a trend that's going on that goes beyond this particular market expansion. Okay, so when we consider a couple of overall conclusions looking at this evidence, what we can draw is a few things. First, San Francisco to LA is simply a promising city pair for high-speed rail in terms of ridership. It's two very large cities, about 500 kilometers apart, so it makes a lot of sense. And when we compare the forecast for California high-speed rail to other HSR lines worldwide, the California HSR ridership forecasts appear generally reasonable. Looking at this, I don't see anything that gives me strong cause for concern or a reason to think that these are somehow inflated or optimistically biased. In fact, if anything, there's potential for California high-speed rail to capture a larger share of the air market than is currently projected. The major uncertainty here is the airline's response to this. They may respond in a few ways. It might be that the airlines decide in response they would reallocate planes to other routes, other more profitable routes with less competition. It's also profitable that they may double down and lower fares in an effort to drive high-speed rail out of business. So either is a possibility and is a matter of a business decision more than it is a ridership response decision. There's also some interesting discussion on sort of comparisons to China, where potentially the domestic air market was less developed in China as they were building high-speed rail, allowing high-speed rail to capture intercity travel that maybe otherwise would not have been served, and maybe sort of displacing some air travel that didn't yet exist. And further, the domestic air market in California and in the US in general is much larger and much better service connecting California cities in particular relative to what you observe in Germany. There's a couple of policy levers being thrown around that maybe have some influence here as well. One of them is you see some discussion throughout Europe of banning some of the shorter haul domestic flights. There's some rules on this in France, for example. And then the other thing that potentially makes a substantial difference is in Germany, if you're a business traveler and you fill out an expense report for your employer, most of the time, if there is a reasonable rail connection, they will not reimburse that business traveler for a flight. And so there's a pretty heavy hammer there, which is a tool that can divert some of that air travel onto high-speed rail. And then finally, a little off topic from the ridership, but on the cost side, we note that Germany and France both were able to take advantage of cost savings that are not available in California in terms of favorable geography and existing conventional rail tracks. In California, San Francisco and LA connections are especially challenging because both are separated by mountains from the Central Valley, and they're some of the most expensive real estate you would find anywhere. So that makes it significantly more challenging from the cost perspective. Thank you, and appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Erhardt. Really appreciate the very interesting analysis of the California and German context. Next, we will hear from Dr. Greg Macfarlane from BYU.
All right. So yes, I'm Greg Macfarlane. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm glad to talk about this research. This was the second half, or I guess bullet 4 that Greg Erhardt shared on his slide about how this study on California high-speed rail was structured. This is particularly looking at that insider's view, bottom-up sort of modeling that we can do on rail ridership forecasting, trying to consider are there different strategies of doing that. So the basics of mode choice modeling, and this has been true for 50 years since Daniel McFadden kind of first applied this technique in the Bay Area, is you try to measure somebody's utility when they choose a mode. And this utility has a few elements of its construction. We represent it mathematically. There's this set of variables X which describe the alternatives that you have in front of you. So how much is the cost of, or the fare of the ticket? How much time does the alternative take? What's my access mode time by different approaches, right? And then you have this other set of variables that describe the person making the choice or the market segment. Is this a high income person? Do they have autos available to them? What kinds of attributes do they have? And then these attributes of the service get transformed into a utility by these coefficients that basically relate people's attitudes towards their utility. So if we see that people really don't like taking modes that take a long time or that cost a lot, we would have these negative coefficients that make long trips or expensive trips less attractive. The specific value of those coefficients, though, we have to estimate, right? And we have to get that from data somewhere. But after we get that, we'll come back to that last point in a minute. After we get these attributes and we measure everything and we figure out the relationships, we then kind of put them into some sort of mathematical framework where we assume that, okay, the stuff that we can't see has some kind of statistical distribution, and then that gives us a probability of choice. And this is the way we've always done it, or the way we've done it for the last 50 years in mode choice modeling. There are two ways of measuring these attitudes, right? So we have these key relationships, how much people value or disvalue the attributes of the service. The two ways we get this value is both with surveys, almost always. A revealed preference survey says we're going to go ask people, what do you do now? Given the choices in front of you, what choices do you make? This is wonderful. We can also ask people what they might do, right? If you had these different choices placed in front of you, how would you choose? Both methods have drawbacks, right? This revealed preference data is not an option if you haven't built the thing yet, which is often what we're trying to do with these models. We're trying to anticipate how people will respond when they have when they're given a new choice that they haven't chosen yet. The drawback of stated preference surveys, though, is that people aren't very good at these hypothetical questions, right? You ask people, what would you do if there was high-speed rail between LA and San Francisco? And based on their limited experience, not having ever made that choice before, they say, well, there's no way I'd ever take it. And as these hypothetical questions get further and further away from real experience, the people get less reliable in their answers, right? So the California rail ridership model, as currently constituted, was heavily based in stated preference surveys. They asked California residents a lot of questions about what their choices might be if high-speed rail was available. But there's always this nagging limitation of stated preference surveys at the back. So a third way forward is you transfer a model. So this is where we go take models from other places where we can use revealed preference data, and we bring that in and give it data from California. And so California doesn't have high-speed rail, and no one in California has a lot of experience with stuff that looks like high-speed rail, at least in California. But other places do have high-speed rail, and we can get data from those places. So we've got two different candidate sort of comparative models that we found in the literature that were easy to sort of port over and transform to the California context. So Taipei, which has had high-speed rail for almost 20 years now, Taiwan has had high-speed rail from Taipei to Kaohsiung for almost 20 years. It's a little bit shorter than the distance from San Francisco to LA, but not a lot shorter. And then Europe, Northern Europe, of course, the distance from London to Paris is very comparable to the distance from San Francisco to LA. This model was developed by the consulting firm Haskening, which mostly consults on night train services, but it includes this high-speed rail component in the model. The Taiwan model is a fairly traditional nested logic structure where you take high-speed rail and put it at sort of the same choice level as air and car, and then there's this public transit nest for sort of more conventional public transit, bus and rail. The variables that it uses are time, cost, flights per day, and car ownership levels at the origin and destination zone. We took the costs, which were in Taiwanese dollars, and converted them into US dollars using a purchasing power parity measure. But other than that, we just got these input variables from the California context and put them in this Taiwan model. The Haskening model uses a slightly different form. This is what they call random regret minimization, where instead of trying to maximize the benefit people get, they try to minimize the comparative difference between modes. So the way that this works is you take the time on air, subtract the time on high-speed rail, and then this influences people's regret. Like, I don't want to pick a mode that has a really long cost or time compared to the mode that I'm looking at. And this model just uses time and cost. That's the only input to it. And we set it so that it had an implied value of time of $15 an hour. We then put it in the California context into both of these models. So the National Household Travel Survey Next Gen data set has been available for a couple of years now. And what they do is they take location-based services data from across the country and package it up at large spatial aggregations so that people can do long distance demand estimation using this location-based services data. When we dug into that data, we did not like the air matrices. They didn't seem to make a lot of sense. It seemed like the location-based services data wasn't able to tell what was connecting flights. So what we did was we took the air data out of the next gen NHTS, and then we replaced it with air ticket data from the FAA's I guess it's Bureau of Transportation Statistics DB1B data set. So we get this estimate of the total demand going from these large zones in California. 30 NHTS zones in California. You can see them here, and we've grouped them up using the same groupings that Greg Erhardt showed in his previous presentation. So this is what these two different models show in terms of high-speed rail market share from region to region in California in 2040. So the key note here is the Taiwan model shows that 27% of the total market from San Francisco and Oakland to LA will be captured by high-speed rail. The Haskening model shows 26% of that market will be captured. So it's very, very different models, but when given input data show very, very similar results. The models do disagree heavily, though, on what will happen in the Central Valley. The Taiwan model is much more sort of optimistic that people from the Central Valley will use high-speed rail to get to the sort of endpoint cities than the Haskening model is. When we compare this to the sort of the headline number here with the California rail ridership model as it exists, this high-speed rail market share, this is from LA to San Francisco, these numbers are pretty much in line. The models disagree on how much of the other modes will be captured, but this one is it's notable how similar the three estimates are. So the central finding of this work is that multiple different models, when given data from California, suggest that high-speed rail will capture around a quarter, maybe a little less, maybe a little more of the total air demand, of the total market demand, split three ways between air, high-speed rail, and car for these cities. Obviously, some limitations to this. We stripped all the calibration constants out of the two models that we brought in, right? So we're just using the behavioral data without any sort of mean effect in it. If you were to do a deep study with this, you'd probably calibrate those models, but we did not at this point. There's aggregation bias, right? These zones are very big. There's a lot of detail in the literature saying that, you know, the access time to these stations is really important, and the location of these stations within the urban framework is very important. This aggregation method to these 30 zones kind of erases a lot of that, or it simplifies a lot of that. And maybe a more geographically precise model would result in different findings. Thank you for the invitation. That's kind of what we've done here. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I think we have a time for one question before we end. So I would say, you know, kind of speaking, a lot of the presentations really focused on the lessons from high-speed rail and other places, or how those models can be applied in many different contexts, many of which is a California context, just because ours is the most, we actually have two high-speed rail lines that are being built, both the high-speed rail project in California and then the Brightline West project from Las Vegas to the Los Angeles area. So if you had, you know, the people from the high-speed rail project in California in the elevator, and so you know, maybe it was a long elevator pitch, what would you say, you know, sum up your research, what would you kind of advice would you give them regarding the high-speed rail project? Absolutely. Dr. Macfarlane.
I think the number one thing that I would tell them is when they get really bad ridership on the Bakersfield to Merced route, don't panic. That's not why you're building the system.
Very good advice. Very interesting. And yeah, that should be ready for the initial run segment in just a few years. So excellent. Thank you. Dr. Erhardt or Chen?
So I think I would echo that. I mean, I think broadly, San Francisco, Los Angeles makes a lot of sense. The Central Valley, I think the numbers are showing that it's not going to achieve a high ridership. So that's to be expected. I think then the second thing to think about is kind of what are you trying to accomplish in aligning your goals with what you can accomplish. Economic development is one of them, for example, in a state that's not growing. Does that make sense? To what extent can it make sense? Are you trying to serve a new travel market and one that didn't exist? Or does it make sense to defer to air in such a situation? So I think just being really clear about what your goals are and what you intend to achieve, and then what the alternatives are that you could do with the money. In economic development, if you could spend the same money on housing construction, for example, would that be a better or a worse investment? These are reasonable questions to ask.
Thank you. And Dr. Chen?
Well, yes, as I mentioned in the presentation, I believe that it's definitely important is to have the US have a more open-minded of learning from countries earlier I mentioned, such as China and so on, even though the political climate is not good. Both in terms of engineering, in terms of plannings, in terms of post-projects evaluations, I think other countries have set some really good example that the US really has to learn and even trying to customize this based on the local needs. I also mentioned about the importance of looking into these land value captures, thinking about the station planning. How should we incorporate other benefits into all these station planning as well as the impact evaluation so that high-speed rail development, it's not only just adding another mobility, but it also as a tools to promote regional economic growth, promote resiliencies, equities, and so on. So that hopefully can receive a more wider general support. So I think there's definitely a lot of rooms to expand it in that space.
Thank you very much. Great messages, great advice. Learned a lot in this session. Thank you so much, Doctors Chen, Macfarlane, and Erhardt, for your presentations. We are going to now go on a 15-minute break. Let me put this up. We're going on a 15-minute break. We will then have a session about rural transit. So again, thank you very much for your presentation. Very much appreciated it.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we should be ready to go. Thank you very much, Hillary, for moderating.
Thank you, Chad. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to our session on rural transit. My name is Dr. Hillary Nixon. I'm Deputy Executive Director at the Moneta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Today, we'll be exploring innovative ways that communities are improving mobility in rural and small towns, putting research into practice, using technology to make transit more efficient, and developing tools and resources that help local agencies modernize their services. We have a great lineup of speakers who are each taking a different approach to expanding access and improving transportation options in rural areas. Our first speaker is David Kack, Program Manager for Mobility and Public Transportation at the Western Transportation Institute at Montana State University. David has more than 25 years of experience in transportation design, research, and operations, and he helped launch several Montana transit systems, including Bozeman Streamline and Big Sky's Skyline. He's passionate about advancing mobility and improving safety for all travelers. Today, David will share how transportation research can be turned into practical, community-based solutions, showing that effective mobility in rural and travel areas often comes from combining multiple modes like walking, biking, transit, and shared rides. Please join me today in welcoming David Kack. David, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Hillary. I had a little work done on my nose, so I won't bore everyone with having to look at me. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk about public transportation. And so I want to define a few terms as we get into this, because as we talk about research, we often get into the, thinking about people in lab coats and those kind of things. And so, what I want to really talk about is just it's a careful or diligent search. We're maybe collecting some information about a specific transit system and area, those kinds of things. You can say I researched what's the best Italian restaurant in town, or what's the most fuel efficient car to buy. So sometimes we overthink the term research. Then what we want to do is talk about, I don't know why now there we go. When you boil it down to it, research is about solving issues or problems. And that's what we want to talk about, because there are a lot of challenges and issues with rural transit. We can think of research in terms of what we are doing. It can be quick. It can be a quick literature review. It can be a survey, do some focus groups. So we can do very quick research. We can do some basic research. Let's, take a year to solve what might be a relatively easy problem. As shown in the photos, it can take some time. For those who are old like me and remember the first Star Trek series, we can see it took about 30 years to get from what was the communicator to the flip phone. One of the things we do when we talk to a lot of people about rural transit is the cost people are spending on transportation. We might make a car payment or fill up our tank of gas and go, oh man, or I've got to change, get new tires, or that maintenance expense I wasn't thinking of popped up. And so you might think of those individual costs, but when you roll them together, transportation is typically the second highest expense for an individual or family behind housing. And as much as we talk about the cost of healthcare, our transportation costs for the individual or family are typically twice that. So part of that research is just providing data and information to people. So saying it is a big expense and we need to think about that cost. When we look about it via automobile, that cost has increased significantly in the last 25 years. If you're driving about 15,000 miles per year, that cost has gone up about 50% from a little under $8,000 a year in total dollars to a little over 12,000. And we know if you're living in rural areas, it is pretty easy to put 15,000 miles a year on a vehicle because you're just driving farther to get to where you want to go. And if that's work, the grocery store, educational opportunities, all those things you want to do, you are typically driving farther when you're in a rural area. I've been real fortunate, having been doing this job for as long as I have, to look at rural transportation, transit issues in a lot of places. We've worked with the National Association of Development Organizations, NATO, for about 10 years now. So have been from places like Durango, Colorado, that looked at some potential intercity bus service. Lebanon, Missouri, a town of about 15,000 people that didn't have public transportation, and looking, do they need it? In Jasper, Texas, working with the Deep East Texas Council of Governments, looking at some options for seniors in counties that didn't have transit service. So we came up with a voucher program. So been kind of all over looking at modifying existing systems or services. Do we need to start a service? Just thinking about how do we provide that mobility for folks. Have been fortunate also to work in a lot of federal land locations and then with some tribal locations, tribal nations as well, from Arizona to Alabama and places in between. Again, looking at getting people around outside of their automobile and providing that mobility in a way that gets people out of their vehicle. In general, the research is asking a lot of questions. So when we go into a community, we're saying, who needs a ride? Where are they going? When do they need to get there? Why do they need that ride? What options might exist or could be created? And typically there's different ways to provide that mobility. So as you answer some of these first questions, you then say, okay, what options are there? It might be fixed route, demand response. Is it a volunteer driver program? Is it vouchers for people to use on an existing transit system? What are those options and what are the best ones to maybe move towards implementation? And then how do you move that forward, get that service, make that change based on the research you have? I often say there's no silver bullet, but silver buckshot. So, people might say, we need a fixed route transit system. And you say, well, let's ask the questions. Is that really the solution we need? But as you look at who needs a ride, where they're going, when they need to go there, you might say, you know what? There is not one solution that is going to solve all of these issues. So we might look at some of these and say, a microtransit service with a volunteer driver program, or we need some van pools with demand response or a fixed route. So to really look at all those options and say, I'm probably not going to find one that solves everybody's mobility need. So we probably need to look at that host or suite of options to implement. So that's really it for now. Again, it's asking a lot of questions and having those conversations and moving forward. I say as a transit system, if you get a little better every year, you're doing a really good job, because a perfect transit system does not exist. So don't think you're going to start one right away. Do your research, put the service out there, learn, improve, and continue to do better. So that's it from me right now. Appreciate your time and happy to answer questions now or when everyone else is done.
Hey, thanks so much, David. I think it was a really great framing for this session. What we'll do is I think we'll save questions for the end and turn to our next speaker. So next we will hear from Kevin Chambers, who's founder and principal consultant at Full Path Transit Technology. Kevin has spent more than 2 decades helping public agencies and nonprofits make the most of their technology investments, ensuring those tools truly serve their mission. Today, Kevin will introduce RideSheet, a data management solution built for small, demand-responsive transportation providers. He'll talk about how inverting traditional technology models can help rural transit systems grow, coordinate services more effectively, and reach more riders. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, and thanks so much for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Hillary. And yeah, I'm just going to jump right into it here. So let me make sure I can advance my slides. Here we are. All right. So a little background on me. I have been working in the technology space for small organizations for about 25 years, focusing solely on small or community-based transit for the last 15. And so I am a practitioner, so I was in a self-deprecating way, I was almost going to put research in quotes here, but I do agree that there's lots of types of research and we don't need to overthink it. But just to let you know that what I'll be sharing here is really notes from the field and work that I've been doing in the world of small and rural transit over the last number of years. Given the brevity of time available, I am going to take a creative approach here. Rather than kind of dive into sort of a blow-by-blow of features, I'm going to talk very quickly about what RideSheet is, and then talk about what I think is interesting for this audience about what kind of lessons we can take from the RideSheet example. So a little bit of a lightning talk type approach. So I will take a little bit of creative license with that. So first of all, let's just talk about what RideSheet is. It is a spreadsheet. It's a thoughtfully designed spreadsheet in the cloud. If any of you use Google Sheets, you'll know what I'm talking about. Basically, Excel accessible from a data center using a browser. Although you can also use mobile-based apps also. Within that spreadsheet model, we have designed RideSheet to be a secure, small-scale database with version tracking. And then alongside that, this is built into Google Sheets. Google has furnished a whole programming set of tools available, basically JavaScript, that they sort of renamed Google Apps Script. And we use that scripting capacity to do a whole bunch of things, mostly to improve data quality, integrate with other tools like Google Maps, and to just make tedious tasks easier. We designed this to be really a low dependency tool. So almost everything is built using Google tools, either Google Maps or things within the Google Workspace platform. And it is designed for demand responsive services, not fixed route. We've been around for 6 years now. The original pilot was funded by the AARP Public Policy Institute, and National RTAP funds work pilots now. So the problem RideSheet is targeting is that there is a gap in tooling in the rural transit space. So if you're a very small rural transit provider and you just have 1 or 3 vehicles, ad hoc spreadsheets, whiteboards, pen and paper, I think they work really well. If you're there and you're comfortable staying there, your community need is fine with you staying there, that's great. If you have 10 to 25 vehicles, then you can jump into this other world where you have tablets. There's a lot of software as a service options available, but in between, the 3 to 12 vehicle space is a really difficult one. There's not a lot of tools in the marketplace, and that makes for a lot of pain points. And that is where RideSheet is situated, using spreadsheets, still using paper. There's the ability to print off driver manifests, for example, but then we're also integrating these kind of cloud-based tools at a small scale. If you look at a sample RideSheet instance, as you are here, you'll see that it looks pretty boring, and that is by design. It is meant to be a spreadsheet. It is meant to use the tools that people either are already familiar with, or if they're going to be managing data, will need to be familiar with. And spreadsheets are really the lowest common denominator of any data management just about anywhere in the world. So each sheet is handled as a data table, and so you can see the main data areas that are being tracked. We have an integration with Google Maps that allows us to have all addresses be geocodable, and if we actually need specific lat longs, then we encode those using plus codes, which are also built into Google Maps, and that is an open source way of encoding latitude and longitude. And you can see that there in front of the second address. So a lot of the work of RideSheet is about design. So we have a workflow where you have data that is for today or the future. You have data that was yesterday or recently, and you need to review it. You need to get things in. And then once you reviewed it and made sure that data is clean with the support of RideSheet, you can archive that data, and that's what you can report off of. So really just applying good data practices within the spreadsheet interface. And that gets you good reports. And so at the end of the month, the idea with RideSheet is basically a small agency can print off their reports right off the bat. They're not spending hours and hours pulling their hair out at the end of the month to get the data they need to tell their story, either to their funders or to their communities. RideSheet is opinionated as software. I won't go through all these items just for time, but the idea is that we really want to make a tool that is fits the needs of small transit. We have 6 deployments across 4 states. We have done some interesting things. The scripting ability of Google Sheets allows us to do some pretty sophisticated integrations. So the Colorado implementation actually involved integrating with 2 other software providers to exchange trip-related data using the nascent transactional data specification for demand responsive transportation. So that was a very, I think, successful pilot that we were able to achieve at very low cost because we're using simple and flexible tools. And we've really gotten some great things out of RideSheet in the sense of support for growth, greater efficiency, and we've really seen with a lot of agencies that RideSheet can be a catalyst, feeling they finally have a tool that's built for them that allows them to grow in other ways, get more vehicles, operationalize their services, and be less ad hoc. So what's this inversion thing here? I put that in the title. This is where I'm going to have a little fun, jumping off with the idea that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. That was Arthur C. Clarke. Let's really run with that. So let's talk about different models of magic. On the one hand, let's have David Copperfield, who you may know. I know him because he's the guy who made the Statue of Liberty disappear some years back. He is, by some accounts, the most financially successful magician in history. And I'm going to juxtapose him with Penn and Teller, who take a comedic approach to magic. And they're very well known for turning the table on magic in the sense that they reveal how the magic is done, and that is how they entertain, is by actually not hiding the secret, but actually making the revelation part of the magic. And I think we can take that and apply it to how technology is applied in the field. I'm going to call it the David Copperfield model, which is really, I think, dominant, gets a lot of attention in the field of transit and society as a whole. I'm talking about moonshot projects with promises of unprecedented benefits. These kind of projects are resource intensive. They often require special sauce, trade secrets, charismatic figures, so on. But the ability to replicate these moonshot projects can take quite a while. Sometimes it never happens. It ends up being hype. But even when there is real value, it can take years or decades to get that replicability and that benefit broadly. Contrast that with the Penn and Teller, which relies on past moonshots, that you have magic tricks that are well known, and then you can now reveal them. This model for technology relies on past benefits that have been demonstrated, commodified tools. I'll be using that term later on. And where you have to have a special sauce or a special person is kind of the opposite with the Penn and Teller model. It's really about transparency, and replicability has already been achieved, and now you're ready for some form of scaling. So we can see that even though I think the Copperfield model gets too much attention, we really need it so that we can get something to commodify. And in the case of RideSheet, we've really standing on the shoulders of VisiCalc and Lotus 123 and Lotus Notes for collaboration tools, NavTech and other tools for the early versions of mapping. But I want to point out an example here for transit, which is the 1970s MIT Haddonfield Dial-A-Ride project. And that ended 50 years ago. But now, here we are, 2025, every single part of that original Dial-A-Ride computer-aided scheduling tool has now been made commodified, either through low-cost proprietary solutions or open solutions, such as the ones I'm mentioning here. So what I think that really means is that the Penn and Teller model, as I'll call it, can really be used to support targeting institutional barriers, and which is really, I think, where we need to be putting a lot of energy, where we have a lack of data and technology related expertise at the ground level, and we need a systematic approach to capacity building across the country, which is really binding a lot of small transit. So I think what we see with RideSheet is a tool for building those systems and data chops and to address the submerged capacity gaps that we need to address in order to support growth. And so I think what RideSheet can be is a call to action and to see where things are now ready for use in a Penn and Teller model because they've been commodified, but yet haven't been identified as such. And that with that identification, we could adjust our procurement and technology management approaches and support growth for these small agencies, which is really what they need to be doing right now, growing to support their needs of their communities. That's it for me. There's some links about RideSheet, and I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. I really enjoyed that presentation and your call for action. Our final presentation features Callie Senezal from Rebel Group and Natalie Amberg from Caltrans. Callie is principal consultant specializing in open loop fare payment systems and transit technology modernization. She spent more than 15 years working on projects that make mobility more seamless and accessible. Natalie is a research data scientist in Caltrans' Division of Data and Digital Services. She applies her background in planning and data analytics to support the development of technology-driven transportation solutions across California. Together, they'll share how Caltrans is helping small, rural, and nonprofit transit providers adopt new technologies, from GTFS data standards to tap and pay systems, and how these efforts can make local services more connected, efficient, and digitally inclusive. Please welcome Callie and Natalie.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Hillary. And I'll kick it off. I'm Callie Senezal. And apologies, my throat, I'm recovering a bit from a cold, so let me know if I get a little too mumbly. So just kicking things off, as you know, Caltrans has long been the steward of California's highways, bridges, and physical infrastructure, providing essential oversight. But as you know, California's transportation goals have evolved, and new responsibilities have been emerging around digital infrastructure, which are like the virtual systems and technology that complement existing assets with the goal of improving efficiency and cost effectiveness. This is something that we're starting to see mirrored across multiple states' policies and plans. So we know that smaller, rural, and tribal transit agencies are essential connectors in our transit network. However, they often lack the staff capacity to manage IT procurements, data standards, or complex vendor negotiations. So when they go it alone in setting up some sort of digital infrastructure, they sometimes struggle to obtain this technology successfully because their size is less compelling to vendors. So instead of having local agencies take on this work and potentially lead to duplication of efforts, Caltrans can really make a big difference through state-led technical assistance programs and processes. Investing in this kind of technical support goes beyond capacity building at the agency level and really can contribute to larger statewide goals and system efficiency. So I realize there's a lot of text here, so I will keep it simple. I wanted to call attention to the Caltrans Integrated Mobility Program, which is a new division within Caltrans that aims to really help make connections easier across modes, regions, and operators. This is the long-term home for the innovation work done by the California Integrated Travel Project and helping scale its impact. It focuses on 4 key areas, including innovation adoption and mobility data standards. So really furthering this work of helping agencies approach and incorporate digital infrastructure into their practice. So what does that work look like? As Rebel Group, we have been working closely with Caltrans on understanding, researching these technologies and engaging with agencies. So Caltrans has already been working on a slew of technologies and how to provide agencies with skills and knowledge around them. So we've been working with them to identify technologies that would benefit from additional guidance. So that are listed here. So that includes technologies like automated passenger counters, APCs, charge management software, on-demand dispatching and scheduling software. So on behalf of Caltrans, we've been working with transit agencies across the state to support implementation, helping with procurements, drafting sample RFP language, and providing industry insights. So as an example of how we've been supporting rural agencies and also addressing market inefficiencies, I wanted to highlight one recent case with Redwood Coast Transit Agency. So this is a small agency that provides bus service in Del Norte County up in Northern California, and they're interested in transitioning their bus fleet to zero-emission vehicles. As part of that transition, they really saw the value in change management software that would help manage energy costs, which can really make a huge difference in a small rural agency's budget. So we worked with them to develop an RFI, engage with vendors, which then resulted in a really strong vendor response to their RFI and developing a specific targeted RFP that they actually just published last week that we feel will get the agency the kind of service that they're looking for. So throughout our work with these agencies, there are a few key learnings that I wanted to highlight. These are key points that we emphasize as part of our technical assistance in really setting these agencies up for success with their procurement and deployment. So the first is being clear on goals. It may seem obvious, but making agency goals around deployment and functionality can really change how a vendor responds in a procurement. So for instance, with APCs, are these passenger counters, in addition to counting passengers, intended to be used for entity reporting? Are they for service planning? Are they for integrating with other types of software or tools? So this has an impact on the type of response and making sure that that response is in line with what the agency actually needs. For some reason, it won't let me advance. Let's see. Try that. Oh no. There it is. Can you see my next slide? No, for some reason. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. Second learning I wanted to emphasize was about bringing the specificity from those goals into the scope of work. A requirements table can clearly distinguish between, say, what an agency needs and what an agency wants. So this really helps vendors know what to focus on in their proposal, and then that can be carried over to the cost section and making sure that agencies know exactly what they're paying for. So for instance, one structure that we saw was very successful was identifying core requirements, which is features that need to be done in a very specific way. Essential requirements, this is a feature that needs to achieve a certain outcome, but there's flexibility in how that outcome is achieved. And then desired features, these are nice to have, but not critical to functionality. So differentiating these really helps make sure that vendors know what you're looking for. And again, you're not paying for unnecessary features. The last learning I want to highlight is around interoperability. So with technology evolving quickly, having the ability to swap out components without having to redo everything here can really save agencies time and money down the road. And this is especially critical in like a rural context. So I list here some ways that agencies can incorporate interoperability into their work, such as requiring open data standards that allow different agent technologies to communicate, being specific about what integrations are needed, and compatibility with software. So we've seen in our work that these agencies, include from small to large, rural, urban, are really interested in this work. So this is really a clear opportunity where Caltrans can rise to the moment and make a real immediate impact for rural and small agencies. This work on digital infrastructure is complementary to existing expertise that the department already has and can help optimize the physical assets that Caltrans manages. So now I'm going to hand it over to Natalie, whose work really exemplifies how Caltrans can offer comprehensive support across both physical and digital infrastructure.
Thanks, Callie. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Amberg. I'm a research data specialist for Caltrans's Division of Data and Digital Services. For those of you that are not familiar with our division, we're in planning and middle programs and work on all things data related, if you didn't already guess. This includes work for the Caltrans integrated mobility that Callie was talking about, which is going to be carried out through DDS. and big data tools such as Streetlight and Replica, which my branch primarily works with, and that's what I'll be talking about today. We also work a lot with transit data, and while we have a branch that's dedicated to transit data quality, most of our branches are involved in transit-related analyses and work on ways to help transit agencies, especially those that might not have the resources or capacity to do those analyses in-house. Next slide. So at Caltrans, every employee has access to the big data platforms Replica and Streetlight, which provide powerful data to supplement our existing traditional data sources. These non-traditional data uses various different sources of data, such as location-based, GPS, and connected vehicles data. But having access to this data is super important because a lot of the time our traditional sources have gaps. You know, for our roads, we can have broken counters, and this data allows us to fill those gaps and then expand our understanding beyond the state highway system. So we can get metrics for any point within the state, which then will give us insights to how people are interacting with our system and then the surrounding networks, and also not just road. So we have a lot of transit metrics, which I'll primarily be talking about Replica today, since this platform allows us to look at the whole trip across modes, so from the start to the end of the trip. I do want to mention Streetlight has transit-specific metrics. However, those for this type of analysis, I like to look at the whole picture. Next slide, which is just a little bit easier in Replica. So this right here is a screenshot of Replica Studio, which is essentially a data sandbox. And while there's so many different types of analyses we can do within the sandbox, this particular analysis that I was working on looked into the areas surrounding Metrolink stations in Southern California. So the goal of this study was to better understand if there are people traveling from areas around one station, which would be the origin, in this case, Burbank Airport Station, to any other area surrounding another station within the same system. So those are all the destinations, and we can filter it that way. As you can see, there's 452, I think, trip destinations. So those are all the census tracts that are surrounding each station. And then the team that we're working with can then determine if there's any potential riders that are maybe taking auto but could be served by transit with the existing transit lines and schedules, and see where the rooms are to better accommodate. We did this for each station within the system. So I think there's over 70 stations in this particular system. And then we download the data into another form of analysis. I particularly like Python, which allows us to dig into the data a little bit more. Next slide. Once we download the data from each station study, we can look into the split between modes across the station, as we're seeing here. You can see the differences between the percent of transit trips. I'm sure you can guess the color, and the difference between the auto trip percentage. If you haven't guessed, it's the orange is transit. We also provided the team with insights into travel time and trip length. So you can go to the next slide, please, Callie. And we can see how the trip time really varies from station to station, from auto to transit. So like Union Station, where that big long blue bar is on the right, it's expected to have a higher trip travel time. There's a lot of Amtrak trips that are going through there. And then we can also see how it varies from station to station, which is pretty awesome. We also included top track travel to and the least common track travel to by mode for each origin station. Next slide. Another study I wanted to share that I'm currently working on is conducting an origin destination analysis in District 1, which, as we know, is a little bit more rural. Our partner agency is interested in getting a better understanding of where people are traveling from when they're going from a set destination, in this case, Cal Poly Humboldt, and then where people are traveling to when they're leaving the same destination.
Natalie, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
We may want to move on because I want to make sure we have time for discussion.
Yeah, I have like one more slide after this.
Awesome.
This is still in the early stages, but we can already see some interesting trip distributions between auto and transit. And then we're not just going to include just the origin destination, but also some additional metrics. And with more data, we can also get some additional context for the agency. Next slide. This is my last slide. So these types of analyses are currently on an ad hoc basis, although as part of these efforts, I am working on developing a standardized report that can be conducted for the state highway corridors and agencies across the state. We're working to develop a set of metrics that, with the help of some Python post-processing, we can provide agencies with more insights into travel behaviors. And this is not an assessment, but just another tool for agencies with the data that we have available. And that's all I had.
Well, thank you all. If I could get all of our panelists to come back on camera, I think that'll be best for our discussion. Actually, I thought maybe, David, I'd start with you, since you come from a pretty traditional research background. So what do you see as the biggest challenges in moving from research findings to the actual on-the-ground implementation in rural and small community transit?
I think it is just putting that information that you've found through whatever research you've done into practice. And if that's presenting it at transit associations, how do you get that information out to those small rural systems? Because, you know, they're focused on getting the buses out tomorrow and what's going on next week. And most rural transit managers have a very compressed timeline. So they're not thinking necessarily 5 years out. And as mentioned, what can, you know, Kevin kind of said, what can technology do for me? I'm worried about IT support and all those things. So I think really it's just saying, how do I make those findings as simple for people to understand and present it in a way to say, you know, this is really just about helping your system next month, next year, and down the road. So just making it as simple to explain and for people to understand as possible.
Yeah, thanks. Do other panelists have some thoughts on that question? There you go. Kevin, looks like you're about to unmute. Oh, no. Well, actually, so that actually does bring me to a question for you, because Kevin, you work for the small company, you've been a founder, and you're obviously collaborating. So how, with other agencies, so how have you found, or what are your recommendations, suggestions for that collaboration so that you can ensure that the innovations are practical and scalable for different agencies?
I think, yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think at the level of the small agency, the rural provider, that is obviously there are large rural providers also, but you know, the small ones, which are mostly the ones that I work with, the ones that don't have IT department, I think what's key is there to be other resources in the state or region that are closely tied to those agencies. So that could be state DOT staff, as we see in California. That could be contracted staff. That could be academic institutions that are working. You know, we see different models across the state, but I think there has to be a bridge between the world of research and the world of practitioners, because you know, in my years, I've just not seen the capacity at the agency level to know how to navigate to that research and then seize it and make use of it in their own agency. With the rare unicorn of like, yeah, oh yeah, I've got, you know, who is super curious, has the time, you know, is maybe somebody who likes to fiddle with things, or but that's rare. And so I think that the systematic and institutional way to do it is to have a role at a state or regional level to bridge those.
Oh,
two
interesting.
things.
I saw a lot of nods come from Callie and Natalie. I wondered if you wanted to jump in on that.
No, I think like one of the things that I think our work has highlighted around this sort of technical assistance for transit agencies is exactly that, is making these resources available. And I think a key is not just making resources available, but pairing it with action. So I think not only have we provided again, like sample RFP language or research, but then helping facilitate actual, say, like vendor demos, supporting them and working through workshops to hone and figure out exactly how these tools might work with these vendors, with these agencies. So, a lot of agencies, I feel like smaller agencies, they might just see a document online and be like, oh, I'm not sure how this applies to me. I don't know what this looks like. And so being able to come to a team, like we work with at Caltrans, who can help sort of translate it for that agency and adapt it, and then also test how it might look like in practice is really valuable. And I think what really sets them up for success.
Thanks. We have about a minute, maybe a minute and a half left, and I want to get each one of your ideas. So think about this as your quick response. So what do you see as the next frontier in improving mobility for underserved communities? Is it policy changes, funding mechanisms, new technology, something else? And I think maybe I'll start, David, with you. Quick response, next frontier.
Yeah, I think really quick, we know there's just not enough funding to do all we need to do. It's, I know, an ongoing battle, but just being able to get more done, longer hours, get out to more areas, it all ties back to funding, even implementing technology. And so important to keep pushing for that need for rural transit.
Great, thanks, David. Kevin, yourself.
Yeah, I agree that more funding is important. I think the directing of that funding is also important. And I think, you could see my opinions kind of came through my session that I really believe we need to be using commodified tools and focusing on organizational growth and capacity building and supporting the will to change, because moving from 3 vehicles to 6 vehicles for a small agency is doubling in size. And I think we need to think about it that way and really help them do that.
Great, thanks. Natalie.
Well, I'm a data scientist, so data. A lot of these
I like
tools
that.
do allow us to look at traveler choices in near real time, and being able to share that data and provide those insights to agencies that cannot do those analyses themselves. And then also just continuing to provide the technical support that our group is, and the Rebel group is, because I think that's really helpful for GTFS data, procurement standardization, and listening to where those roadblocks are and help streamline the process.
Thanks. Last word, Callie.
Last word is going to be about flexibility. So I think flexibility in funding, flexibility in our tools, not being overly prescriptive, because I think often, and I think empowering agencies to do what they know best for themselves.
Perfect ending. Thank you all so very much. I appreciate it. And thank you for all of our attendees at today's session. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hillary, Natalie, Callie, Kevin, and David. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks again, Hillary. Fantastic job moderating. Fantastic job, everybody, for your presentations. We're going to go on a 15-minute break before our next session, which is about Intercity Bus Networks. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Great, let's go ahead and kick things off. So we'll start just a couple seconds early since people are busy. But I am Joe Sweeterman. I am professor at DePaul University and director of the university's Chaddick Institute. We do urban planning and transportation right in downtown Chicago. Beautiful day here. And was approached a while back to do a session about how states are really creatively using and local governments intercity bus. It's a hot topic right now. It's a sustainable mode. It's filling gaps. We have a lot of concerns about equity. And state governments, it's an exciting aspect of intercity bus travel with branded systems, or they give them names. And and marketing and social media. And so in putting the session together, I thought it would be great to have two states and one kind of regional entity. And so we're going to have Nina Stocker from Washington State Department of Transportation kick things off. John Endo is going to talk a little bit about the Reading area bus authority and some Amtrak thruway service in California. And then Zach Trogdon is going to speak a little bit about Virginia and the work he's doing there. So we're going to have them just give some short presentations, and then we're going to hold Q&A to the end, but we're going to make sure we leave some time for that. So I'll start out with Nina, who I've known for a while and was one of my first calls on this session because of the great work they're doing in Washington. She's program manager for the Travel Washington Intercity Bus Program and the Public Transportation Division for Washington's DOT. And for 6 years, she's been working to improve rural and urban mobility through advancing transportation equity, by expanding intercity bus service to diverse communities across the state. She has graduate degrees in urban regional planning and public administration, and she's a nationally recognized expert on this topic of how state-managed systems can work, passionate about connecting people across the state. So, Nina, I want to kick things off and show us some of that exciting expansion we're seeing in Washington.
Thank you, Joe. I sure will. I'm going to try to share my slides here. Let me know when you're able to see those. And then I'm going to bring back the meeting, so hopefully I can at least see some of you.
Looking good, yes.
All right, fantastic. That is a good start then. All right, thank you for that introduction, Joe. So again, Nina with the state of Washington. So Washington State Department of Transportation, we manage our intercity bus program within our public transportation division. So coming to you from myself in Spokane, Washington, which is on the east side of the state. Many of you might be more familiar with Seattle, but I am just about as far east as you can go before you head into Idaho. So just to kind of geographically lay out where we're at. I'll start kind of talking about really the birth of our program and how we kind of came to be involved in providing intercity bus service and partnering with private providers across the state. Hopefully you can see the slides up. I think Joe confirmed that. I'll talk a little bit also about some of our latest really planning efforts. We are about 8 months out from the completion of our latest intercity bus statewide study update. So have some things to share from that, lessons learned. There you can see on this introduction slide that we partnered with a consultant transpo group to support that work of that intercity bus statewide study update. And that process took us about a year to engage in. So again, our program really started on the heels of a study that was done in about 2006 that really identified some major gaps across the state from a rural to urban connectivity perspective. So a lot of rural communities that had really in the late 90s and early 2000s lost a lot of service that really I think came out of, and heading into the financial crisis. And there was a lot of connecting service lost from private providers, a lot of even local transit service that sort of reduced frequency. So just an identified need immediately to kind of fill some of these gaps, especially for that rural to urban connectivity piece. We always kind of set out grounding ourselves with the 3 goals and sort of objectives on the screen. Those are programmatic goals for us, but also goals that we really try to center whenever we do a plan or study update like we just completed. Again, those are equity. We really have a commitment to ensuring that we're engaging in a lot of public outreach and engagement across many of the communities around the state and in all of sort of the region offices of the DOT here. We have a really diverse population within Washington State and want to make sure that we're kind of speaking to all of those different diverse communities and populations to ensure that we're hearing, from them where those needs are identified. Overarching goal really always is accessibility for us. We really quite simply just want to improve access to intercity bus service to help people get where they need to go when they need to do so. Always looking also at ensuring the safety and comfort of our ridership when they board the bus, when they're waiting at a connecting point or getting ready to board a bus, and also looking at that for any future new services or routes that we might put out to bid, and understanding where those stops and transfer points are and what types of amenities are available to ensure, again, the safety and comfort of ridership. A little bit of a lay of the land here with the existing map of intercity bus service across the state of Washington. The colorful lines are the 4 current Travel Washington branded routes, so that are a part of this subsidized intercity bus program. Those are funded through the FTA 5311F rural formula program. And you'll see, and very important to point out, the other sort of in the gray routes that are the private network that is operating unsubsidized across the state of Washington. The whole map really lays out the idea that this is a connected network, and we can't ever just look at one piece of the puzzle. We have to ensure that the routes that we subsidize and put out for bid through our solicitation process are, of course, seeing those meaningful connections to the national intercity bus network. So very important to ensure that that's happening. That, of course, goes broader than just intercity bus. Rail, Amtrak connectivity is very important. We really have 3 sort of hubs where rail connectivity is happening across the state with intercity bus. Those are Spokane, Seattle, and Pasco, Washington. And you'll see that we have subsidized service that connects at all 3 of those different hubs. We operate this through private-public partnership with providers that you may be very familiar with: Greyhound, FlixBus, also more regional and local providers like Northwestern Stage Lines and Central Washington Airporter. And we do, in our state, also connect and ensure to have good connectivity with our ferry system that's managed by the DOT. That, of course, happening more on the west side of the state, over all of the peninsulas that we have, where ferry service is an integral part of this network. A little bit just diving deeper on the existing services. We sort of, as a part of the last plan update, went through and did an inventory of all of the stop locations and what types of amenities are available in any of those locations, to kind of understand the difference between some very rural stops where our bus route might only be marked by a sign on the side of the highway or road, versus some of those larger transportation or multimodal hubs where, we have access to food, restrooms, additional shelter, and again, those meaningful connecting services that take folks well outside the state of Washington. Those, again, are the 4 current branded Travel Washington routes. Worthy also of mention, and our program is a little bit known for the fact that we brand each route individually with an economy of scale within that region, right? So in this case, we have a lot of agricultural communities that are represented by names such as the Apple and the Grape Line. The Gold Line operates between a community called Kettle Falls and Spokane, where the gold rush was quite prevalent. And then we have the Dungeness Line way over on the west side of the state, where Dungeness crabs are quite regularly caught and consumed. I want to also share a little bit about the challenges that we really see with the intercity bus program and services really on a national level. Obviously, we have frequency limitations. Intercity bus is a much different thing than a public fixed route transit service within a local community, where you might have headways of 10 to 15 minutes and can rely on a bus coming quite frequently. Most of our intercity bus routes, certainly in the state of Washington, operate between 1 and about 3 round trips a day. Some on the main corridors, so the 2 sort of bisecting highway corridors, the I-5 and the I-90, certainly have higher frequency, but especially for that rural service, we see very limited frequency. Geographic coverage, of course, is another part of that. And again, the reason we go out and do these studies to understand where those gaps and needs are in the system. Continued connectivity barriers, low frequency, of course, lends itself to issues with connectivity when you have providers coming into a hub only once or twice a day. It takes a lot of planning to ensure that folks can make a meaningful connection between 2 different routes, or say from a bus to an Amtrak train. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. As a part of our study, we of course always do a robust demographics analysis and travel demand analysis to kind of understand who our riders are and how they're using the existing service and where those sort of the demand is driven. So you can kind of see some of the modeling we do here to understand, again, where folks are trying to go, how frequently they're trying to access specific origins and destinations, so that, again, we can plan better when we walk toward implementation of our work. I want to talk briefly about, again, going back to that, ensuring we have an equitable engagement and outreach process with this work. We went out for several months visiting, face-to-face in many communities, talking with riders and non-riders of the service, trying to see sort of where the challenges were, where the opportunities were within the existing network. Always like to share, we did these AI personas that we created of riders. Some of them had stories, that they were trying to reach medical treatment. Others were trying to visit family across the state. Others were trying to access employment or educational opportunities, and kind of laying this out and giving folks an idea of whether or not that trip was even possible in the existing network. And if it was, how long it might take, or what types of transfers were involved and what type of cost was involved, was a really effective way during public engagement to get folks kind of out of their own experience and get them to understand where the need comes from for other communities and populations. So just wanted to share that because it was a great way for us to kind of share what was happening. The study, of course, that we completed at the end of last year came with a whole host of service recommendations and policy recommendations for improving the program. One of the new services we are actually literally right now putting out for bid, our request for proposals should be on the street by the end of this week, is this route between Spokane to Pasco. That is an old Greyhound route that was eliminated some time ago, and we're really trying to fill a gap there. We heard a lot about folks trying to make connection there, a lot of meaningful connectivity on both ends of that route, to rail, to airports, and to other national intercity bus providers. So excited to announce that we are in a place where we're actually moving toward program expansion right now. And Joe, I might be close to my time, right?
You just got about 30 seconds left. So yeah, take it away.
Okay, great. Well, one of the last things I'll share that's kind of an exciting thing to share here from a Washington State perspective is that the FIFA World Cup is coming our way in 2026. And we've had an opportunity to actually receive state funding additionally to support expansion of our intercity bus network in support of all of the folks that are coming to the state for the FIFA World Cup. We're expecting just shy of 1 million visitors within a month's time frame, really focused on the west side of the state, though capacity for hotel rooms and everything else will force folks to kind of spread out across the state. And we'll see a lot of connectivity between Vancouver, BC, down through Seattle into Portland. So we're working right now to actually implement some additional frequency on existing routes, partner with our private providers, and ensure that we're really ready to handle that type of growth within a very short period of time. So that's exciting for us and something unique to share. And I'll end with that. Thank you,
Well,
Joe.
thanks, Nina. That was really great. And what I really take away from your comments is one, you're unique for both having interline connections or through ticketing with both Amtrak and with the Greyhound Flix network. And just that's quite an achievement, because they're two totally different systems people can buy through tickets to. And how you brand those routes, it's just so interesting how when you give something a name, people don't say I'm taking the bus. They can say I'm taking the Apple line. It creates I think a sense of quality control that you don't get when it's bus number 6 or whatever. So that's
Right.
I really like how you're approaching that. So thank you for that. So let's go next to John, who is enthusiastic transit professional, John Anto at the Reading Area Transit Authority. He's the transit general manager, and 24 years of experience there and with the authority. And he's a part-time manager also in the cities of Burlington, North Carolina, and several California cities. Lifelong passion for public transit began for John at age 5, which I want to hear about sometime. That experience spans large urban, rural systems or innovative planning, management, mobility to meet community needs. So you're in the right spot there with both local transit and Amtrak Thruway, John, and tell us what's happening there.
All right, I'm happy to share our experiences. Is my presentation up?
Looking good.
All right. Well, top of the morning to everyone. I'm John Ando, the Transit General Manager for the Reading Area Bus Authority, and I'm going to talk to you about our relationships with Amtrak and Flixbus as a public transit agency. So you can get to know who we are. We are a joint powers agency created between the cities of Reading, Shasta Lake, and Anderson, as well as the county of Shasta. And we provide public transit services throughout Shasta County on fixed routes, flex routes, microtransit. We have a bike share program, a subsidy program with Uber, a van pool program, and a complimentary paratransit program. We transport about 504,000 passenger trips a year on a fleet of 41 vehicles and vans. We contract out all of our services. MTM is our largest provider that runs the fixed route bus, microtransit, and paratransit. Dignity Health runs our rural services. Enterprise does our van pool. Uber runs our subsidy program, and then Shasta Living Streets does the bike share. And then in addition, the administrative staff is also contracted. I'm actually an employee of the city of Reading, and I have a staff of 7 that is assigned solely to run RABA. This kind of gives you a perspective of our transit services that we presently operate throughout Shasta County. As I mentioned, the multiple modes that we operate, we are 7 days a week. We do about 1.1 annual system miles a year, and we operate about 72,000 system hours. This gives you a perspective of our rural services that operate outside of the Reading urban area and the commuter routes that we serve in those rural communities. So I'm going to start talking about our relationship with the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority first. The San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority was created in 2015 to manage the Amtrak San Joaquin service, which on November 3 will be rebranded to Gold Runner. And that corridor is responsible for the trains that go between Oakland and Sacramento to Bakersfield on behalf of Caltrans. It is managed by the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission. They do have 6 daily trains presently, and they're getting ready to restore the 7th train, which will connect Sacramento and Bakersfield. In addition, there are bus connections to the train services at various points throughout the state using public transit agencies like RABA, as well as public bus companies that Amtrak charters out. Our present intercity services that operate right now, basically from Reading to Sacramento is shown here. There is Greyhound, Amtrak Thruway, which we're a contractor for, FlixBus, Amtrak, and then previously First Class Shuttle. You can see on the table that we used to have a lot of intercity connections coming to Reading in 2000. 10 trips on Greyhound, 4 on Amtrak, 2 on FlixBus, 1 on Amtrak train, and then 4 on the First Class Shuttle. We're now down to 1 round trip on Greyhound, 2 round trips on Amtrak Thruway through us, 1 on FlixBus, and then 1 on Amtrak. And then First Class Shuttle went out of business in 2017. And this gives you kind of a perspective of all the intercity options that come into and out of Reading, basically starting with the train at 2:21 in the morning until our last bus that leaves at 1 p.m. Going southbound, and then northbound starting with the train at 3:06 in the morning and and then FlixBus at 11:55 p.m. Then in addition to intercity connections, we have our airport in Reading, which services 4 different points throughout the, 4 different points throughout the country. And then I'll be talking about later in my presentation, our extension of our Amtrak connector route to Sacramento, where it'll also connect people to multiple destinations across the country. And I bring this up because as an intercity provider, it's important that we are making connections to the national bus network, the national train network, as well as the national air network. So Amtrak Thruway service, we started the service under contract to the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority and Amtrak on August 22nd of 2024. Previously, the Routes 3 that you see on the map was operated by a chartered company that Amtrak went out to procurement for that operated the bus from Stockton through Sacramento all the way to Reading. We took over the piece from Reading to Chico, and the private charter company took on the responsibility from Chico to Stockton. With the contract that we have as an Amtrak contractor, we do get full cost recovery, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. We do run 2 round trips. Right now, it's presently operating between Reading and Chico. Because of us doing this relationship with the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority, they were able to allow what is called bus-only ticketing for anybody that is boarding the bus in Reading and Red Bluff. So someone can actually can pay a bus-only ticketing fare to Stockton and not necessarily ride a train. There is a state law in California that does require all of Amtrak Thruway routes in order to ride them, you have to connect to a train, unless the 3 Joint Powers Authorities collaborate with a private operator and they determine that there is an unmet need. And at that point, the JPA could opt to convert that bus route to bus-only ticketing. And then the last most important thing is, as a throughway connector, we are responsible for connecting our bus to trains that are on the San Joaquin, soon to be Gold Runner, and the Capital Corridor trains. This kind of gives you a perspective of our statistics. How the relationship works is our contractor MTM bills RABA for the service. In turn, Amtrak will deduct the ticket sales that is generated for tickets from Reading, Red Bluff, to wherever that passenger travels on the Amtrak network and assign it to the bus route. We then deduct our fare revenue that we collect through bus-only ticketing. And then the San Joaquins applies the subsidy, whichever is the deficit, to make sure that it's 100% cost recovery so that RABA is not subsidizing the service. Then the balance is paid by Amtrak, and that gives you basically the perspective of how the service is covered in cost. Since we took on the service August of 2024, the ridership has started to grow, and it's not as much as we'd like to see it. However, as I talk about our extension to Sacramento, we're hoping to see more passenger trips on that service. And you can see on the table that we have the bus-only riders, and then we have the Amtrak-linked trips, and then the total ridership for that route. And I'm showing statistics through March of 2025. There are other relationships like ours in the state of California. Santa Cruz Metro, YARTS from Merced to Yosemite, Kings Area Regional Transit and Visalia Transit in the Central Valley, El Dorado Transit to South Lake Tahoe, and then even the Altamont Corridor Express train is treated as a throughway connection for connecting people between San Jose and Stockton. And I understand that the San Joaquin JPA is looking at creating more of these relationships with public transit operators, and we've had a few agencies reach out to us expressing interest on partnering with the San Joaquins on assuming some of their throughway routes, particularly the Chico to Sacramento piece by Beeline. So we're now in discussions with the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority to evolve that throughway route that has been running between Redding and Sacramento since 1990 into a new service that will travel along I-5. Originally started as the Salmon Runner by our local regional transportation planning agency and metropolitan planning organization called Shasta Regional Transportation Agency. The new route would operate via I-5 from Redding to Sacramento, and we'll have stops in Red Bluff, Orland, Sacramento Airport, and Sacramento. Still provide 2 round trips utilizing the motor coaches that we own. Timed connections to Gold Runner and Capital Corridor trains. It will be included as an interline in the Greyhound and Flixbus networks. We'll still have the same relationship with the San Joaquin JPA and Amtrak to run the service. The San Joaquin sets the fares for the route. It'll be sold on the Amtrak, Greyhound, and Flixbus ticketing platforms, or passengers can pay on the bus. And the route will also still be eligible for bus-only ticketing. We're also working on a relationship with Sacramento Regional Transit District, so our riders can get a free day pass. They want to ride bus and light rail in Sacramento County. And then we're also working a relationship with Glenn County so that riders can still get to Chico from Redding via Glen Ride with a connection in Orland. We anticipate this service would start when the 7th train begins, which is late 2025 or early 2026. This shows you the proposed network of the new I-5 service. We're hoping to do the route in 3 hours and 25 minutes, so it's fairly competitive with the car and faster than current intercity bus connections that are traveling via Chico and State Route 99 to Sacramento. This gives you a perspective of the proposed schedule. The 2 trips that we would run, one in the morning south from Redding, one in the afternoon, and then both trips in the afternoon from Sacramento to Redding. One reason why the relationships works well for Amtrak and the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority is previously when the private operator was running the service, the bus had to stay overnight in Redding and they had to put the bus operator in a hotel. With us running the service, the buses basically just come back to Redding and end in Redding. And so there's no need for the additional deadheading costs or the hotel costs for the bus operator. Our proposed financial plan is shown here for the 2 trips. The first line shows the cost that MTM bills RABA, the expected Amtrak fares, the expected bus-only fares, the subsidy from the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority. Tehama County Transportation Commission will be providing CMAQ funds to support the route. We are pursuing 5311F in the out years, which will also help support the route. And then Caltrans Division of Rail through the State Rail Assistance Program will basically provide the difference for the first 2.5 years of the service. We also have a grant through CERTA for 7 intercity buses to replace our current motor coaches. Our fares is shown here. Typical trip will be about $23.75 from Redding to Sacramento. It's $5 to Red Bluff, $10 to Chico. We encourage folks to purchase their tickets at Amtrak.com if they want to get the discounts that are eligible for their respective categories. This route is going to connect to a multitude of transit operators along the I-5 corridor. This gives you a perspective of all the agencies that we're connecting to. So this basically meets the true intent of those utilizing 5311F to provide those intercity meaningful connections, whether it's to buses, trains, and in our case, even airports.
John, we're down to about 30 seconds, so we want to wrap things up and we'll do some Q&A later.
Okay, let me So we're the North State Express. This is a new service that we're doing in conjunction with other transit operators. You can learn more about this at northstateexpress.org. This gives you an idea of Greyhound service in Reading in 2010. We are the Greyhound agent in Shasta County. We basically started that as a reseller in 2023. We interline our routes with Greyhound, so you can actually purchase tickets on robber routes and see them on the Greyhound network. We did the same with FlixBus starting in 2023. This kind of shows you the FlixBus route network, just so you can see our routes in Reading, Shasta Lake, and Anderson on their map. Same for Greyhound. As a reseller, this gives you a perspective of all the revenues that we generate from selling their tickets, the commission, and then what we pay back to Flix. And then, as I mentioned, we have 5 of our routes that are interlined with Greyhound, and then they reimburse us at our fare for every Greyhound ticket that we accept on our routes. My contact information is here, and I thank you for letting me present about our relationships with Amtrak and Greyhound and Flix.
Yeah, that's really impressive. That's really impressive. And I'm always struck at how California integrating rail and bus in ways where you have marketing, but in your case, carefully calibrated schedules with local buy-in. That's just a different thing. We don't have that in Illinois, where the connections tend to be a little bit more do happenstance. And to see, your metrics are just so rich too on this. So it's exciting to see, and this I-5 service could be a bit of a game changer. So,
Sure.
So appreciate that.
It's been an unmet need for a very long time, so we're excited.
Indeed. All right. I'm going to hear more about that sometime. So finally, we'll go to Zach Trogdon, who's been over 20 years of a public sector management experience before coming to the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. He says the chief of public transportation there. He was executive director for the Williamsburg Area Transit Authority. So you've been in the trenches a bit. Has also worked a bit in local governments in a couple states, and also has a little bit of experience in North Carolina with a number of cities too. So Zach, good to have you back to a webinar I'm hosting, and let's hear what you have to say. Great. Are you there, Zach?
Still on mute. Okay. Can you see the Virginia Breeze slide? Okay.
Perfect. Take it away.
All right. So yeah, talk about the Virginia Breeze, our Commonwealth's intercity bus service. So we launched back in 2017 after some of the private providers were gone. And so after a study, we determined how we could do this. So the Valley Flyer was our original route back at that time, and since then we've put 2 other routes on the road, and you can see the two of the new routes were during COVID, so we kept going and kept pushing forward. And then we established one late in 2021 as our newest route. So those are the latest ones. Like everybody else, we contract the operations. Dillon's Bus Service based in Maryland, and they provide vehicles, drivers, and the maintenance. So we've been going at it, a little under a decade. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we've grown. So this is our current network. As you can see, we're focused a lot out in the west. If you can see, that's Blacksburg is where we have a large university, and so that's I-81 is along there, which is give you a little bit of East Coast geography. I mean, that's one of the main corridors for commerce up and down the East Coast, all the way down to the deep South. So a lot of trucks we get in the mix there, but carrying students up to. You see, we focus on getting everyone to Union Station, and so that from there. They can go anywhere in the world. We interline with other bus services that serve that corridor, have very robust service there. And so that's where all of our current routes terminate, is Union Station in DC. I wouldn't really say this with, well, I'll get to it on a later slide about with the way we get some of that in-kind match to help with our expenses on running our Intercity bus service. But talking about the growth, here's our ridership. As you can see, it's been going up year to year. The Valley Flyer, again, it's named for the Shenandoah Valley. Just to give you all a little bit of a geography lesson on Virginia. So the Shenandoah Valley, the beautiful valley, which I-81 runs up and down, and Blacksburg is down in the Roanoke Valley. And then of course the Highlands Rhythm is called that because Bristol goes down to Bristol, Virginia, which is, I'll go back to the other slide, which is the birthplace of country music. Actually, Congress even mandated that. So we also have some kind of hokey names for ours. It was great to see Washington, how they have how they've branded theirs. And so you can see we've been growing. Some routes, have a lot more usage than others out there in the West. We have university traffic. Our Capital Connector has gone down some. I mean, that runs along I-95. And as we were talking about with somebody else, there's quite a bit of options between Richmond and Washington, D.C. Amtrak is running a lot more. We're getting a lot more Amtrak service more frequently. So the bus is competing there, but certainly the rural areas can get them to some other connections from the rural areas that we run to. But you can see we've had, good growth over the last few years. So our fare box recovery, real quickly, we do have over 40%, which we're thrilled about. And you can see that the steady growth in ridership is what has helped us keep our prices low and haven't had to raise the fares. And as I was saying, we're able to, because we're connecting to those Northeast routes where there's unsubsidized service. We do take advantage of the fact that we can use some in-kind money for what the match might otherwise be, so we don't have to pay cash for some of the match. So that does help us stretch our dollars further. All of our routes right now are assisted with 5311F funds, all of our routes at this point in time. So that's been something we've had to focus on just to try to stretch our dollars. So, but ridership and fare box recovery has been going well. So a little bit about how with some changes we're making. Everything's connected to the Northeast at this point, but we'll say that the Southeast is growing, and so certainly looking that way where people may want to be traveling to the Southeast through Intercity Bus that's not served by private providers right now. We've been able to hook up with our folks in North Carolina. If you all know, Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, Charlotte have been growing for years and years. And so there's certainly interest in going that way and being on the border with them. We want to take advantage of that and serve people may want to come to Virginia from there too. And so, we've started working with them. And so it's a new, but North Carolina has a nice, robust intercity bus service program as well. And so it's a pleasure to be working with them, and we'll see how that grows. Another thing we've got, going on is if you notice on our map, I'll show you another one in a second, but we have everything is going northeast, and that makes sense given what's up there. The megalopolis is up that way, so everything's going northeast at this point. But we also have a large urban area down in the southeast of the state. It's got the largest naval base in the world, plus the best port in the country. That's backed up by facts, I'm sure, but certainly that's my opinion as a proud Virginian as well. And so, we have a large urban area down in the southeast as well with Norfolk and Virginia Beach. And so we're looking at establishing a route to take that east-west corridor. If any of you know about Virginia, we have Interstate 64 that runs along east-west through the state. And so that hasn't been part of our service yet, given that we wouldn't get that same benefit of some of the matching that we get going up to DC. But we see a need there, and we're going to invest the resources to get that east-west route. And so you can see it there. We go down to Norfolk and Virginia Beach and up to the up also again to the valley and to those rural areas. So there's not as many rural areas in there as our other routes, and so that's where we've been trying to hit the more needier areas first. But we're very much looking forward to this, and we know the need is there, and it's fantastic for us to, again, a lot of this stuff, we want to have train service one day, but that's many more billions and much more time than what we can bring to bear with Intercity Bus. So we look forward to getting that going. Next is, as Nina kind of mentioned with them, we also, as we establish more routes, we grow, more people start taking our service. We want them to have a place to catch the service, a safe place, a place of dignity. And so we also are concentrating on enhancing our bus stops. So We're going to be taking an inventory, making sure things are ADA accessible. We do focus also on multimodal connectivity. Most of our stops also have local transit service. We'd also have stops that, do catch places like Amtrak and other, other modal types of connections. And so that's a focus of ours too, as I heard Nina talking about, and even John talking about as well. And so, we're going to be conducting a bus stop needs analysis. I put this slide up here also so you can see that one down on the bottom right there. That's a new shelter that we're putting down in Wytheville, Virginia. So that's a rendering of it. And so the town down in Wytheville, a small town off I-81, has worked with us. They'll be maintaining the shelter when it's up, and the local transit service goes there. And so it's just a great partnership. It's fantastic to see these things come together with, all across the Commonwealth. And so with that, I believe that is my last slide, and we can go on from there.
Thank you, Zach. That was fascinating. And what's exciting about your work is, as recently as the pandemic, we weren't sure whether these rural systems were going to recover more like typical public transit systems, back up to 70%, 80%. And the fact that you're seeing these records, and maybe the Washington Richmond route's an outlier because Amtrak is there hourly or whatever. But do you want to tell us how the demographic or the ridership patterns have changed in the last few years? What have you noticed? More college students, less? Yeah. Give us a sense of that.
Yeah, I think that's really the thing. You have young people that aren't getting licenses and stuff like that, and then just as costs have gone up, parents certainly are more willing to allow their kids to take the bus. And so it's just been a nice partnership with these places. I mean, one thing is we also go through Charlottesville, which is where the University of Virginia is, and we fairly recently, within the last year or so, our staff worked to get a stop there closer to campus. It had been kind of far out before, so there's a lot more acceptance of it, a lot more partnerships, and so it's been very good as the service has grown to see those things be nurtured as well.
Great. Well, let me ask you another quick question. I'd like maybe Nina and John can respond to. Is that what's so promising is that the stigma is too strong of a word, but the sense that the bus is only a mode of last resort. I'll try to get my friends to take me, and if all that fails, I'll consider the bus. That's kind of changing in some of these towns where you have young professionals want to go to DC to see their family or friends or for an event. What has your branding help with that? And I want Nina and John to respond to that too.
If you want me to go first, yeah, absolutely. It's just people see it on the interstate. We have a ton of marketing going on, and again, once people take it and once word spreads, it's definitely the nice buses. It's a safety thing too. Or I don't know if it is, but I-81 and I-95 and Route 66 to go up to DC, the traffic can be horrendous, and so it's a less stressful type of ride as well, and I think it's much safer. So those types of things help.
I would say in our case,
go ahead, John.
The branding is important, but the connectivity to the trains is really what's selling our service, and everyone's excited about the Sacramento extension. We get multitude of requests for getting to Sacramento just for the mere purposes of going to Sacramento, connecting to the airport, riding the train. So I think it just sells itself by us partnering with these with Greyhound, Flixbus, and Amtrak and the Joint Powers Authority on our services.
Yeah,
and we get their benefit too to promote our services as well.
Exactly, and your branding with Amtrak on the bus. I mean, Amtrak has quite a good reputation, especially in California with your state-supported system. So they know that there's something larger that's helping manage this than just the local transit authority. And I think that's, extremely promising for the next few years. And thank you for that. Nina, do you want to give us a quick thought on that question?
Yeah, I don't think I'll have a ton of original thought aside from just agreeing with both of the other speakers. Really, yes, branding is important to us. It's really worked well for us in local communities to kind of brand something regionally specific. that they can attach to, a name and a brand that they can feel kind of, special about. But the connectivity piece, I would say, is really where we're seeing the driving ability to increase use of our system. So I think the better we're connected, not only with airports and rail and ferry providers here within Washington State, but really our bordering states as well, which I know is something Virginia is focused on as well. But we are working very quickly right now with Oregon, with Idaho, to make sure that we have connectivity going outside of our borders. We know that in most states, right, almost half of ridership that boards an intercity bus is leaving the state, right? Whether that be landing in an airport and flying out of the state, or getting on a train that leaves the state, or another bus. That's the reality of how folks are using this really long distance travel system. So ensuring that those connections are in place is integral.
Yeah, that's in closing here, we'll wrap it up. But all three of your systems really cater to some of those longer distance trips, with interlining with North Carolina for you, Zach, and of course what you just said, John. So I really appreciate everybody being here for our audience. We do have an Intercity Bus newsletter. It goes out every month or so. Just look up DePaul University Intercity Bus and you can find us. And I want to thank everybody for a really good session, especially our three speakers, and appreciate the invitation to be part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will wrap it up. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for that great presentation. Really appreciated, and everybody that presented. So we will go ahead and go on another 15-minute break, where we will come back for a session on microtransit and paratransit 15. Okay, feel free to begin. Thank you all.
Thanks, Chad. Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna, and I am the System Planning Branch Chief here at Caltrans District 12, located in Orange County, and I'll be your moderator today for this session. Our session today is about microtransit and paratransit ties, and we're joined by Dr. Eleni Bardaca, Dr. Jerice Rodriguez, and Dr. Michael Hyland. Dr. Eleni Bardaca is an associate professor in the Department of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering from North Carolina State University. Dr. Eleni Bardaca is her work focuses on two main research areas: the study of the causal, spatiotemporal, socioeconomic impacts of transportation investments and policies, and the analysis of aggregate and individual travel demand, preferences, and needs related to public transportation systems and emerging smart mobility systems. In her research, she uses quasi-experimental methods, spatial analysis, and econometric modeling. Dr. Bardaca holds a PhD and MS degree in transportation engineering and an MS degree in economics from Purdue University. She earned a 5-year diploma in civil engineering at the National Technical University of Athens in Greece. Our second presenter is Dr. Jerice Rodriguez. Thanks. And Dr. Rodriguez is the interim chief of paratransit operations at Miami-Dade County Department of Transportation and Public Works. Ms. Rodriguez is the interim chief of paratransit operations at the Miami-Dade County Department of Transportation and Public Works, where she leads the county's paratransit service program and is spearheading the modernization of its supporting software infrastructure and program. Her leadership focuses on improving operational efficiency, enhancing service delivery and customer experience through emerging technologies, and expanding equitable mobility options for all residents. With a strong foundation in transportation, engineering, and innovation, Ms. Rodriguez plays a pivotal role in DTPW's Office of Innovation and Mobility Services, where she led transformative projects, including the launch of Miami-Dade's microtransit program and the region's first autonomous microtransit service. She has managed key regional efforts such as the county's shared mobility and connected and autonomous vehicles plans, and currently she is leading the US DOT fiscal year 22 SMART grant pilot project, focusing on testing smart loading zones to improve curbside management. Her work on the Knight Foundation AV initiative has contributed to the design and deployment of AV pilots throughout the county. Prior to her tenure at Miami-Dade County, Ms. Rodriguez was a faculty member at Florida Atlantic University, where she taught transportation engineering and conducted research on climate change and transportation resiliency. She also worked with the City of Miami, managing the trolley system, the on-demand transportation program for seniors, and other multimodal projects. She holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Puerto Rico, completing the master's and doctoral degrees in transportation engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And lastly, we will hear from our third presenter, Dr. Michael Hyland, who is an associate professor at the University of California, Irvine in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. He is also an affiliate of the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Irvine. He received his PhD from Northwestern University in Civil and Environmental Engineering, and his research focuses on modeling and analysis techniques to support the planning, design, and operation of multimodal transportation systems. He employs these modeling and analysis techniques to understand the potential implications of transportation innovations on society. Dr. Hyland is an associate editor for Transportation Research Part A, Policy and Practice, and an early career editorial advisory board member for Transportation Research Part C, Emerging Technologies. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Dr. Eleni Bardaka. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So yeah, thank you all for the invitation to speak in the microtransit section today. So we will be talking about microtransit systems, and those are primarily on-demand shared public transportation systems that can operate in different settings, but they're also really great for suburban and rural areas where the traditional fixed route buses don't work really well. So my work today is about understanding what are the neighborhood attributes and the system design characteristics that lead to higher use of these systems. And I don't have control of my slides, so I will keep saying next slide, please. So the motivation for this research is that, well, microtransit is really new, but it's becoming also very popular, and we still don't have a good understanding of demand and what affects demand and what brings more people to use the service. So yeah, that's the reason we wanted to do this research. So next slide, please. So the questions we're asking is, what are the socioeconomic attributes, the built environment characteristics that make a significant contribution to the demand for this system, but also how these vary across different systems. And when we look at multiple systems, what design attributes kind of stand out that they are bringing a positive contribution to demand. Next slide, please. So in this research, we focused on North Carolina. That's where I'm located, my university is. And so this research was actually done with funding from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And we studied 5 different systems. You may be able to kind of see a little bit where they are in the map. And some are in the more mountainous areas. Some are in, one is on the coast, Wilmington. And there's 3 around the Raleigh area, and Raleigh is the capital city, North Carolina. So the service areas are still pretty diverse, but we do see some characteristics that we can say are similar. So higher proportions of zero vehicle households, higher proportions of households below poverty compared to the state, and non-white population. So next slide, please. The systems we also studied were having different characteristics, operational characteristics, and that's kind of very common in microtransit systems because you can really tailor the system to fit the needs of the area it's serving. So, for example, some of them had the option to pre-schedule rides while others were purely on demand. Some had users walk to nearby locations and virtual stops, while others were picking them up outside of their home address. And the acceptable waiting times also differed. Next slide, please. So in this research, we used trip microdata on individual trip requests and rides that were completed. And so we had information on the pickup and drop-off coordinates of each trip and also the times. And then we associated that with a few different things. So one was population attributes of the area, those primarily coming from census, also information on employment in the area or distances of each neighborhood from the city center or town center, and also the service attributes that could be playing an important role on demand. For example, the fare, the hours that the service is provided, whether the service is door-to-door care or people have to walk to take microtransit, and the acceptable waiting times that are set by the public agency, which basically reflect how long of a wait from the moment you request an on-demand ride to the moment your vehicle arrives, like what they consider acceptable, what goal they have set for their system. Next slide, please. So we did two types of models. We did specific models for each system, and we also pulled all the data together across those 5 systems, and that way we were able to see what design attributes come out as significantly affecting demand. One caveat here is that we only worked with 5 systems. So there is small variability on this design attributes, and we really have to do these studies for many systems, many more systems than 5, to be able to say with certainty that these are the important attributes here. So I put that question mark there. Next slide, please. So I want to summarize a bit of the findings and what was revealed as important. So neighborhoods that had lower incomes had a higher proportion of carless households and a higher proportion of female population were coming out as contributing much more to microtransit demand. So I think this makes sense. It highlights that these transit-dependent populations are the ones that are using the service, and the service is actually essential. And so it's important to maintain this the affordability for these systems. But the female populations was an interesting one, because in some of the initial studies that were more of surveys where people were asked if they would adopt these systems, the results were that more male populations would use them. While in this work, and as well as some surveys that we did of riders, which I don't have time to show today, but it was very clear that it is female populations that are coming up to be the more likely users. And some of the reasons we think is because they may be less likely to have a driver's license or accessing a car when there are fewer vehicles in the car in the household than the people that are employed. And so we really need to consider the needs of these female populations. Many of them have to travel with children. And we have heard from focus groups a lot of difficulties when they have to do that, and how they have to carry car seats along with their things plus the child and walk to a pickup location. So these are things that are important for us to consider. Next slide, please. Younger populations also came out as contributing to use versus other populations, where again, it makes sense because they tend to travel more, and they also are better to adapt to new technologies. And that tells me that we may need to do a little bit of a better work to engaging senior citizens. Next slide. We looked at variability by site and how these factors may be influencing more or less demand. And really the proportion of younger populations and the female population came out as having kind of the higher elasticities here. So higher contribution to demand for these systems. And next slide should be about the built environment. So low wage jobs, residential density, health-related jobs that are reflecting medical land uses and proximity to population centers were all leading to higher demand. And that also, I think, highlights the importance of having or thinking about having partnerships with employers in the area, because we've seen in some of our study areas how microtransit connects and helps a lot with some specific centers or factories, and how much those employers get benefit from microtransit. So in terms of service attributes, most of them seem to be important. Again, there's a caveat here that we didn't have enough variability to be able to say a lot. But if you go to the next slide, there are two important things that came up here. And the first one was walking to a pickup point versus being picked up at outside of someone's home. It seemed that this making people walk had an impact on demand. And it's something to think about, because again, talking to people, it seemed like there's a lot going on with making them walk a lot, and or not a lot. The evening hours are a concern. Unsafe crossings are a concern. A lot of these virtual stops are automatically created and they're not checked by anybody. And they may be in locations that are not safe and make people cross highways that in locations that are not safe. So what are we really winning is a question, especially in the areas that we studied. None of them were areas with high congestion where saving a couple of blocks would make a very big difference. So it's definitely something to think about. And the second point has to do with the service hours. And so thinking how we can maybe have longer service hours for this system, for these types of systems, would really help with people that have evening shifts. In some of our surveys, we saw a lot of people taking microtransit to work, but not being able to take it back because the service would stop at like 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. So yeah, thinking about the implications of these results for the users. Next slide, please. So yeah, that's our research. I want to acknowledge the funding from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And I think there is one more slide to just quickly say that we love to study existing systems, but we also love thinking forward about developing new, more equitable, I will use the word, systems for the future, and thinking how we can fairly prioritize trips that are very critical and maybe push trips that are more flexible to off-peak periods so everybody can be served. But people that need to get to work or people that need to get have medical appointments, they can get there on time. So yeah, thanks so much for listening, and I'm happy to hear your questions.
Thank you for that presentation. It was very interesting. We're actually going to save questions for the very end. So for everyone that is listening in, there was an email at the beginning of the sessions with where to submit any questions, and we'll take questions at the very end after all of our presenters have finished their presentations. Again, thank you, Dr. Bardaka, for your presentation. I thought that was really interesting, especially about how the different service attributes influence microtransit demand and who's taking microtransit. Up next, we have Dr. Therese Rodriguez, who is going to present, who is the Interim Chief of Paratransit Operations and who is going to present on mobility service innovation. Thank you. Oh, Doctor, you are on mute.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. I will be talking about microtransit and paratransit services in Miami-Dade County and how we have been innovating these services. Can we go to the next slide? Miami-Dade County is the largest county in the state of Florida. We have about 2.7 residents. And the Department of Transportation and Public Works is the mobility management agency in the county responsible for managing our transit services, our a street network, including traffic signals. So we provide and we operate about 4 core programs or services. These are the Metro Rail, the Metrobus, the Mover, and the paratransit service STS. Metro Connect is our most recent, it's a first and last mile service. And every day we provide or we serve around over 268 passengers per day. Even though STS or paratransit program and Metro Connect is contribute to the 5% of the overall rides or trips served every day, it really plays a very important role. STS is critical because for many, this is the only option they have. The Metro Connect, it works as a first and last mile, and we also have the service in places that we don't have. We have some transit deserts or we don't have many options. Can you go to the next? Thank you. So I will be talking now about our mobility service roadmap and innovation and how we started with this, innovating these 2 programs. Our on-demand microtransit service, or the Metro Connect, formerly Go Connect, was launched in October 2020. This started like a pilot. We wanted to test how proper or where is this solution or service model will be more proper deployed and how could help with the system, how would be integrated with our major transit system. In order to deploy this, we needed to use grant funding. We could not take operating funding from buses or Metro Rail, take it away to deploy this service because it was a pilot. So we relay in grant funding. In 2023, we proved that this was working. The ridership was increasing drastically. Even though we have the COVID, we changed the goal, the main goal of the service that was just providing first and last mile service, and we needed to change this scope of work to include multiple destinations, no connection to transit only. The ridership was increasing drastically by year. So in 2023, we deployed our new bus system, and this new system was possible because of the Metro Connect. We expanded zones, we eliminated routes that were not prioritized, and then we replaced it by the Metro Connect or the on-demand microtransit service. In 2023, we were able to deploy our first South Florida autonomous vehicle microtransit system. And in 2024, recently, we also started experimenting with the overflow pilot, where we try to manage the demand in places or moments, in areas and moments that we have what we call less desired trips, the one that cause or lead to long wait times and less efficient trips. And now we're in the process of reimagine how our paratransit and microtransit will look like. So we are now working in different scope of work for the new technology as well as the structure of these programs. Next, please. So how we started. Metro Connect, or at that moment in 2020 was called Go Connect. It was intended to provide first and last mile. This is dynamically routed rides, and their shared rides is nearby corp to corp. And it was provided at the beginning only in 4 areas. It's actually at this moment is a free. We don't have any fare. We're gonna be implemented later, and we depended on federal and also state funding for this program. Next. So everybody know and pretty much a good idea how this kind of on-demand microtransit service works. We have our own branding app where you are able to book, pay, track, and plan your trips. Good, next. So in 2023, we have in the first new bus network revision and implementation in 40 years. And we rely in Metro Connect, which is our on-demand microtransit system, to be able to implement this system and this new bus network. We discontinued some of the routes and we implemented new service zones. We increased from 4 zones to 13 zones. And it was critical for the implementation of this new bus network. Next. So here you have how we have the expansion from 4 zones to 13 zones. That is what we are servicing now. And we also noticed that there were zones that were so large that the trips were not efficient. The wait time was exceeding our standards, that it was 20 minutes, the desired or target wait time with and it could go up to the 30 minutes, but that's not the desired target. So we ended splitting zones, eliminating zones, and changing how the zones look like. So from 4 main zones, we increased to the service zones to 13 across the entire county. Next, please. So in 2023, in December, we partnered with May Mobility, and we implemented the first IAV microtransit system. The rider were able to just, when they was in one zone, we have 3 vehicles. So anyone that were requesting a ride, it might have an offer from IAV. So they were able to choose between the regular Metro Connect ride or the AV Metro Connect ride. We have one safety operator behind the wheel, and one of the original intention was to be able to inform our public about how the autonomous vehicle technology works, and also because we believe people will feel more comfortable. And the plan was to, after 2 years, just remove the safety operator and have the vehicle operating like a self-driving vehicle. And people would be able to have the ride, but we encountered some issues. For example, we knew from the beginning we could not solve a demand issue with this. We were testing, it was a pilot. So there was a small zone within an existing zone, and it would call it like this a route aware map. And we had some issues about, for example, vehicle could not go through the driveways, they could not go to certain areas. So it needed some more coordination. It worked well, but also the cost for providing the service was twice the cost of a regular ride. Can you go to the next, please? So, sorry for the setting, it should not look like that, but so this pilot lasts from December 2023 to July 2024 recently. We have 3 AVs level 4 in one zone. We were serving about 30 rides per day because only operated during sunlight, and some in a period of time, like for example, for 9 to 3 p.m. A short period of time during the day. The average waiting time was about 9 minutes. It was an excellent, optimum. We have a duration of 12.2 miles trip, like the distance, and the distance was about 3 miles long. It seems like people really like it. People really were ranking like very positive. We have a great feedback about it. But at that moment, we recently, because of the budget constraints, we decided to stop the pilot because the cost, like I say, the cost of having this autonomous vehicle is twice the price or the cost of providing regular rides. So it was not sustainable at that moment. But it proved that people really were people were not even concerned about they never expressed any concern about safety. People really like it, but it needed more. We needed to invest more in order to grow. So we decided that the priority was to provide services. So we discontinued the service, and we plan in the future to expand to other zones, if possible, expand the AV or in a different zones across the county. But for the moment, all the microtransit is provided by regular vehicles. Can you go to the next, please? So because of the increased ridership and the distance, some of the trips are really, really long. We decide to start the overflow pilot. The idea behind this is the system automatically send the less desired trips, the longest trip that that will lead to delays or long wait times. If we send these trips to Uber, we would be reducing the waiting time, maximizing our fleet, and providing more rides. This happened only in few zones, and we determine which are the more problematic zones during peak hours. It's only during peak hours, and there are some conditions or criteria in order for the system to block these trips to Uber. It has to be that the wait time is exceeding 25 minutes, and the trip duration has to be, the estimated trip duration is over the 14 minutes, and the Uber trip cost, it will be 15 or less. Our current cost per ride with Metro Connect is about $13.96, which is lower than the national cost per ride. So daily we have about 200 rides provided by Uber, and our availability of the ride increased by 5%. But we also realized that we need to set up our expectations, and we need to be aware that when you are using this kind of service, on-demand service like TNCs, the expectation of the riders is different. And we also realized and learned in the process that when you compare public transit to TNC, the people will prefer the TNC because it's door-to-door versus near corp to corp in the case of microtransit service. And also they only wait in Miami for 5 minutes instead of 20 minutes that they wait for the Metro Connect service. So we learned that this works, and it has to be used in extreme situations. For example, we don't employ this every single day. It's when the traffic, with the peak hours, when we are low in the capacity is limited. Can we go to the next? So we found our service has increased drastically. We have we provide around 2,000 rides per day. We provide also ADA accessible rides. This is about 40 ADA accessible rides per day because a share of the fleet is ADA accessible. We have 80% of the time there is a ride available, and over 400 residents have access to Metro Connect or microtransit system. Can we go to the next? I'm gonna start skipping some of the slides to meet the time. So we also found that 42% of our rides are shared. That means 42% of the time are shared rides, and the cost per ride is below the national cost per ride for microtransit. Our annual operating cost is $8 million. With all the budget constraints, we needed to find ways how do we maximize our resources and reduce the cost. So I'm going to talk about what we are implementing now to achieve our goal. Next slide, please. So what we determined recently in our budget process this year, we decide to implement a fare collection for premium service and a fixed route mode preference. That means that people that are in the area that you have another fixed route option, you are not provided with a microtransit option. And we also establish a 3-mile distance cap to make the trips more efficient and the less desired are sent to transit. So with this, we are expecting to reduce our annual operating costs by 2.5 million. Can we go to the next? Something that I did not mention is that we also found that some of our trips, our paratransit trips happen, the 10% of our paratransit trips happens to be within the microtransit zones. And I'm talking about the 10% of our ambulatory trips. So we also provide and manage the paratransit service program. This is the 10th largest in the county. We provide service countywide 24 hours a day, every single day. And this is the 16th largest in the country. There is a $3.50 for the fare, and our operating cost is $60 million. We contract out the services, the provision of the service, and we have during peak hours about 475 and sometimes over that vehicles in during peak hours. Can we go to the next one? This is how our STS or paratransit system look like. Our fleet is over 400 vehicles and having 475 or over during peak. Next. So we serve about 1,600 trips per day, and we found that we have a 14% of all these trips are considered late trips. So this is, and we suspect that we have more than that. And we also have found that in the last 3 years, we are exceeding the operating cost by over last year was 15%, meaning our operating cost is 63 million. So we are looking for a way how we can reduce that, how we can manage and have a more sustainable program. And one of the things is that we found that 10% of our trips happens within the microtransit zones. Can we go to the next? So our vision and thinking how we can change this and how we can optimize our resources is to have a unified mobility service in the future. Actually, we have started working with transitioning from the current Trapeze software for the management of paratransit to a new, and we envision iCloud platform, a unified platform that can manage both microtransit and paratransit to allow for the commingling of services, the commingling of trips, commingling of fleet, commingling of resources, and also commingling operators. So this is, we're starting in the couple. We are hoping that in 2 months we're gonna be able to advertise the RFP for the technology, for the software. Can we go to the next slide? So we are now in the process of advertising the solicitation for the software, but we also gonna have 2 other upcoming solicitations. One is for the service delivery of both services, multiple providers, and another one is for the operations and management of these services. And the idea is to spring 2028, we were able to launch what we call, and we don't know how it's gonna be called, we don't know how it's gonna look, but it's gonna be like unified mobility service structure that will allow us to add services, emerging services, on-demand services, and municipal services as well. Next. The idea behind this is, the first thing is to streamline our operations, make it reduce the cost of operating, share the fleet, the operators, expand the coverage and the mobility options for our riders, improve the financial sustainability. We think that at least we're gonna be saving like as a minimum 50% of our budget with the streamline of the operations and leveraging our resources. And we want to be able to enable and support data-driven decisions. And the most important one is that for first time in history, we are the technology is allowing us to close the equity gap in mobility. So it's going to help us to elevate the rider experience, especially for the paratransit riders, that now there are not the experience of a paratransit rider and a regular transit is completely different. Using this technology, we are hoping that the paratransit rider will be able not only to book, track, pay, and book their rides, it will be able to take more informed decisions, and having one unified platform, unified app, they will be able to choose what is the mobility option that they prefer or is better for them, and to also allow them to have same day, real time booking. Next slide. That is the last one. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Rodriguez. In an effort to move on to our next presentation, I will hand it over to Dr. Michael Hyland, who is the Associate Professor at UCI. Thanks.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so happy to follow two excellent presentations. My work is more, let's say, model-based. That doesn't mean that I don't use data in real systems. In fact, we've done extensive work in calibrating our models. So I'm going to talk about the design and operation of microtransit services, but explicitly alongside fixed route transit services. So this is an agenda or kind of outline for today. A lot of the definitions and acronyms have already been covered, so I'll go through those briefly. A brief introduction and motivation for mingling, well, that is putting together fixed route transit and microtransit. I'll talk about what the goal of our research is and why that goal matches with what I think transit agencies at cities should be doing when thinking about microtransit. Talk about performance metrics and decision levers. I'll give a very brief description of our research methodology and then again get into about 4 key findings and insights from our studies. Okay, so I'll use the terms corner-to-corner service, which was previously mentioned. Essentially, the user has to walk a little bit from their origin to a nearby stop, and similarly from the drop-off stop to their final destination. I'll use door-to-door to refer to what is essentially preferred curb location to preferred curb location, not actually getting help from the door to the door, but going from the corner or from the curb you want to the curb you want to get picked up at. I'll use PUDO to describe pickup and drop-off locations. And then VKT and VMT are vehicle kilometers traveled and vehicle miles traveled. Okay, so have here a diagram. These are 4 trips, the same 4 trips in each of these 4 diagrams. We have 4 different services that are serving these 4 travelers. It looks like it's only 3 here, actually. We have the fixed route transit line. You can see it doesn't deviate at all to serve travelers at their origins and destinations, so it requires a good bit of walking. In our walking enabled corner-to-corner microtransit, the top right, we see that we have slight deviations from the main route for the transit vehicle, with also a little bit of walking for the travelers. Door-to-door microtransit, you can see that we're able to serve all the travelers with just one vehicle, but there's a lot of deviation involved and a much longer route for the vehicle. Whereas in a ride-hailing case here, we have to serve each one of the passengers with their own vehicle or probably 2 vehicles because there is no ride sharing involved. All right, so in my view, fixed route transit and microtransit are inherently complementary. The benefits of fixed routes are, of course, it's good for mass transportation. It scales well with demand. The main disadvantage is, of course, the first and last mile, particularly in lower and medium density areas. Microtransit has the kind of inverse. It's flexible. It can cover within a service region, essentially any corner or any curb that people want to be picked up or dropped off at, but it doesn't scale nearly as well as fixed route transit does with demand. That is to say, as the demand for the service increases, you immediately need to increase your fleet size and the number of driver hours, which is the main cost of a microtransit or fixed route transit service. So essentially my hypothesis, the studies I've been doing on this for like nearly a decade now, is that joint designs of fixed route transit and microtransit can produce the best outcomes, Pareto improving. So whatever your objectives are, considering them both simultaneously can push both objectives or many objectives in the correct direction. So I think the big picture questions that we, as let's say an industry interested in transit, are grappling with is where and when is microtransit best suited? But really the better question, I think, is the second one, which is what role should microtransit play in a multimodal public transportation system? So just because microtransit works well in a particular region doesn't mean it's necessarily better than fixed route in that area. So we need to find where microtransit works well and where it fits with the existing infrastructure. All right, so my research goal is to help plan and design microtransit service jointly with fixed route transit to improve mobility and accessibility within communities across the world, around the world. So planning and design is essentially a decision problem. And for any decision problem, there are many elements that we need to be thought about, but I think three are particularly important. The first is performance metrics, or really what do cities and transit agencies care about? Why are they thinking about implementing microtransit in the first place? So what's the goals, and then how do we measure those goals in terms of whether or not the service is meeting them? The second is, assuming I'm a city agency or a transit agency, what can I actually control? What are the design variables, the planning variables associated with microtransit and fixed route transit that I can change in order to improve my service? Dr. Bardaka was talking about this in her study as well. And then you won't hear too much about this today, but it is something that's important to think about at the planning design phase is what are the key sources of uncertainty? Microtransit at the operational level, there's tons of uncertainty, tons of unreliability. Are the drivers going to show up for work? Are the passengers going to show up at the pickup and drop off locations? I think at the kind of the planning level, though, the key uncertainty is how is the demand going to respond to the service that we actually put out there in the field? Okay, so what do I think are the most important performance metrics when it comes to microtransit? So I'm going to distinguish between operational level performance metrics and planning level performance metrics. So operational, think, okay, you've got your budget and you're operating the service. Let's monitor these performance metrics to make sure we're doing well compared to other people out there, and see if we're improving over time. So I like to think of these in two categories. The first is the service quality. How well are we serving our customers, the public? Three metrics I like to use. I have a list of 20, but I think these three are the most important. The first is the rider wait time. Not just the average, but the distribution. What is the 95th percentile wait time for travelers? What is the 90th percentile? The second is how likely is a request or a rider to be rejected because the system doesn't have enough capacity to serve them. And the third is user satisfaction. Just asking people, Likert scale 1 to 5, 1 to 7, how satisfied are you with the service broadly and your most recent trip? On the other side is fleet productivity. So transit agencies, cities are purchasing microtransit vehicles or renting them out or leasing them and paying drivers. How well are they utilizing those assets, the drivers and the vehicles? So two metrics here. The first is passenger served for vehicle revenue hour. You'll see this one pretty commonly in operational settings. But I think another one is passenger miles served per vehicle revenue hour, to capture the fact that some trips in some service regions in more trips than others. So take into account how long the trips are to better normalize. At the planning level, think as you always should, right? Costs and benefits. The costs are somewhat straightforward. The second bullet point here is the one most commonly cited in the press, which is the subsidy per passenger mile, or the cost per mile. I think we saw about less than $20 in Miami-Dade, but you'll see articles in California of $40, $50 per passenger served. I think it's really important to keep track of the total taxpayer subsidy. This doesn't get reported in the press as much, but generally how much money is being spent on microtransit to subsidize it. And then in the same way we normalize by passenger mile for the fleet productivity, I think it's important to normalize by passenger mile when it comes to the subsidy as well, serving longer trips for serving shorter trips. On the benefits side, again, I could come up with a lot of metrics here. The first is ridership, but I think we need to go beyond ridership. So in general, what is the purpose of transportation service? Well, it's to get people to the places they want to go, to do the stuff they want to do. The best way we have to measure that is accessibility. I have two different accessibility measures. One is perceived accessibility. This involves surveying people and asking them, essentially, how well does this microtransit service and the existing public transit service allow you to do the things you want to do? And the third here is the isochrone basic accessibility measure. I don't have time to go into it, but essentially how many jobs are available within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes from your origin. We also do encourage some understanding of the distribution of the benefits of accessibility. So here I have accessibility spatially resolved before microtransit and after microtransit. You don't need any fancy metrics, just display spatially how the accessibility varies across space in your region. And then if you're interested in environmental performance metrics, mode substitution, vehicle miles traveled for the fleet, and fleet emissions are important to keep track of. Okay, so that was performance metrics. Let me talk about now design parameters for microtransit first, and then we'll talk about fixed route transit. So I have a long list here. I'm thinking in the interest of time, I won't go over all of these, but it is to say, when you're designing these services, you do have a good bit of flexibility. All of these things that you're going to see in a little bit impact the cost of the service, as well as the service quality you're providing to your community. Smaller set of variables for the fixed route transit. You have your routes. Do you change your routes? Do you redesign your network in the face of microtransit service? What's the headways? What's the frequency on those routes? And what about fares? Do you adjust your fares for fixed route transit if you have microtransit operating as well? All right, so I really like this slide, so I'm going to go over it in somewhat detail here. So essentially, there's two big categories that a city or transit agency can control when it comes to microtransit: the service quality and the fare. All of the variables I showed on the prior two slides fit into service quality or fare. Service quality and fare directly impact the operating costs, the demand, and the operating revenue, or the fare revenue. And then I have two key things that I care most about, which is the total cost, the total subsidy required to operate the service, and the mobility and accessibility that I'm providing to the community. So how do my two design variables impact these outcomes? Well, as you improve service quality, your operating cost is probably going to go up, but your demand is also going to increase. If your fare increases, demand is going to go down. And if your fare increases, all else equal, operating revenue is going to go up. But if demand increases, then operating revenue is going to go up as well. And then, of course, the subsidy is just the difference between the cost and the revenue. Whereas if you improve your service quality, you're going to increase mobility and accessibility. And as you increase your fare, you're going to decrease your mobility and accessibility. So I think it's a powerful framework to think about how service quality and fare impact the two things we care about. They're two of the most important things to care about. Okay, so my group develops models. I tend to use optimization and simulation approaches. We've been building a model funded by the state of California for about 3 years now. It's a high fidelity model of the microtransit operations and a lower fidelity model of the fixed route transit. And then we have, I think, high quality models of travel behavior. That's particularly mode choice and also multimodal transit path choice. And then we integrate these two models, the system performance on one hand and the demand or behavior on the other. This is a multimodal path through the transit network. So you can see there's a walking layer, a microtransit layer, and a fixed route transit layer. This way we can model any type of intermodal or multimodal route for a singular traveler. I'll skip this, but essentially iterative algorithm that equilibrates between the demand and the supply or the performance. Okay, so I've done case studies in 5 different areas of California. You can see them listed here. Lemon Grove is the one you'll probably hear most about, a suburban area near San Diego. Demand distribution 24 hours. Okay, so first set of findings. Microtransit requires additional taxpayer subsidies. The cost of microtransit scale near linearly with a number of driver hours, not quite linearly, there's some steps there, but essentially for all the case studies we've seen, whether you're replacing a fixed route transit line, you're supplementing a fixed route transit line, costs go up if you have microtransit. Really no way around it. Second, other side of the coin, microtransit in areas outside the urban core improves mobility and accessibility. It does so substantially. Number 1 and number 2 have been confirmed by numerous pilots in California. It costs a lot of money, but people are really happy with the service. It's allowing them to get to those doctor's appointments they couldn't get to. It's allowing them to get to those job interviews they couldn't get to before. So cities and transit agencies must grapple with this trade-off. There's really no way around it unless maybe ABs can help us in the future, which we can talk about during the Q&A. I'll skip the graphs here, but they just illustrate what I just said on those 2 bullet points. And the second is related to fares. So we did some studies on setting fares for microtransit and setting fares for fixed route transit. We have a lot of results, but two, I think, are quite important, and one of them might be a little bit controversial. We found that it's always prudent to have time-dependent fares. That is to say, during the peak periods, when demand is high for microtransit, the fare should be higher. Don't need to do surge pricing like Uber and Lyft, where you're dynamically changing the fares and they can go to $30 per mile. But because microtransit assets, the vehicles and the drivers are limited, prices need to be used to manage the demand. And the second, which is I think less controversial, but also important, in suburban areas where you're designing your microtransit, not exclusively as a first last mile service, but as one of the options of the service, you should have discount transfer fares. That is to say, you shouldn't have to pay the full fare for the fixed route if you came there via microtransit. That's because basically you want to aggregate your demand onto the fixed route, and encouraging these transfers from microtransit to fixed route transit allows you to use your microtransit assets, your vehicles more efficiently. Again, in the interest of time, I'll skip over the detailed results and leave my presentation there. Let's see. Yeah, final recommendations if you want to look at this, but I will stop talking.
Hi, Dr. Hyland. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was really interesting. I know we're a little bit over time, but we are the last session, so we wanted to just sneak in a quick question for the panel before we closed out. So our question for you is, how do you see autonomous vehicles affecting microtransit and paratransit policies? If there's anything that you'd like to see prioritized. I know, Therese, you talked a little bit about the programs that you're already piloting in Miami-Dade. Yeah, if everyone could go and answer that. Again, the question is, how do you see autonomous vehicles affecting microtransit or paratransit policies? Thanks.
I can start if you want. This is a question that we get very often, especially because the people are really concerned in paratransit about how paratransit is going to be working if you don't have a driver that can assist the person to, this is door-to-door service, and also because of the union, the drivers union. This is another question that we have very often. We know that autonomous vehicles, same as artificial intelligence, would change the way and the type of the jobs that we have in transit agency. And we know that, we are aware of that. Our role to start understanding the impacts and how we change the role of some I would say employees or some job positions. For example, I will say, I'm not worried about the autonomous vehicle. I think it's going to offer more opportunities, not only for the rider, also for the employee opportunities. In this case, now we have, instead of having a driver, we can have a companion. There are a lot of paratransit riders that don't have a companion, but someone that maybe cannot drive for different reasons now can be a perfect companion and can be trained to assist the paratransit riders and also regular riders, because we usually think about, I believe I'm actually about the universal design. Everything has to be designed for everyone. So if we start designing for people with disability, we are designing for everyone. And if you can have a companion for someone to have a kind of disability, you can also have a companion for an elderly or for someone that doesn't speak English. So I see the autonomous vehicle and the technology as a great opportunity for us to reimagine the role of these services, particularly in paratransit service. I think we need to start thinking about, in the case we don't have that companion, how then we're gonna be replacing the driver, how we're gonna provide that human service that is needed in paratransit. But at the same time, we also have to evaluate the opportunities that now we are bringing everybody to the same platform and the same opportunities.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'm not an expert on paratransit, but everything you said makes total sense. When it comes to microtransit, as I pointed out in my presentation, the main costs are the drivers themselves. So by having truly driverless vehicles serving passengers, that can drastically reduce the cost of both microtransit and fixed route transit, or you can have driverless buses as well, presumably. I'm not exactly sure how the technology will play out. So I'm excited about the potential for driverless vehicles and microtransit fleets. The kind of ownership operational levers there is something that counties and cities like Miami-Dade need to figure out. Is it partnering with Uber, Waymo, Zoox, etc., for them to provide the services with their existing vehicles? Or is it, I don't know, purchasing in 20 years your own driverless vehicles, or leasing them and programming them to serve the routes and the passengers you want to serve? I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I think it can help us get around what is an inherent trade-off between providing better quality mobility and accessibility and not hampering budgets too much with these door-to-door, curb-to-curb services.
I want to add, I'm completely agree with you. This is going to reduce our costs. And now you have to remember that you don't have to take breaks that the drivers needs and this kind of service interruptions. But at the same time, one of the things that we found out during our AV pilot with Microtransit and other AV deployments that we have is the curbside. We usually think that the curbside is not critical because it seems to be static and not dynamic, but it's just important as it says transit service itself. So we need to have this infrastructure for connectivity. We found out that in order for an AV to park, they need to have the space, the parking space available. So that's when, and for dropping a passenger as well, if you have the loading zone occupied, then you have an impediment for the drop-off and the safety drop-off of your passengers, where we started here in Miami-Dade exploring how feasible are the smart loading zone and how important they are, because in the future we need to have that interaction, that connectivity extremely important for the safety and efficient operation of the autonomous vehicles, ride sharing or transit services.
Amen.
Thank you both for answering. And for folks that are watching, Dr. Bardaka had to jump off to a prior arrangement. But that being said, thank you to our presenters for your very, very interesting presentations. And I will pass it off to Chad to close us out. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your hard work for this. So Jerice and Dr. Hyland, Joanna, and of course to Dr. Bardaka, thank you so much for your presentations today. We are looking forward to our schedule tomorrow. Just going to share that very quickly. So tomorrow we have our keynote speaker, Dr. Karen Philbrick, a session on AI in transit, green transportation in rural settings, and a panel discussion on automated transit shuttles. So we'll look forward to that. So again, thanks to everybody who participated today. Thanks to all of our sponsors and the steering committee and everybody that helped put this on today. And we'll look forward to day 3 of the symposium. You have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much, everybody.